It is Thursday, April 20th, 2023, 4 o'clock p.m., and I'm going to call this meeting to order. First order of business, we are going to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. And the board, if you will look in your binder, your packet, you will see the minutes from our previous meeting that was held on March 16th at 2 p.m. I'll give you a moment to look those over, and when ready, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
I noticed that we did change that where it was for the D.W. Clark, and then they changed it to Tim Batters. Remember, that's not the one we heard. But then she did ask to be changed, but I didn't know if that should be in the minutes.
Yes, so I think this is where they're making that adjustment, and they're noting that you have that in there.
All right. I make a motion, we approve the minutes as presented.
I second.
Okay, I have a motion and second. Is there any discussion? If none, the motions will be approved. I mean, the minutes are approved. Thank you. Okay. First on our agenda today, we are adding regular agenda item 4A, conflict of interest discussion. So item 4A, presentation, discussion, and possible action regarding conflict of interest provisions and process for recusal of board members. Because, board, this is an appellate matter and it's different from our typical variance hearings that we have, we've added this item to the agenda. And I'm going to have Mr. Kirkland, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question about recusal has been asked by a number of folks. Some of you actually have asked it, so it's thought we would talk about what the general requirements are and what the things you need to weigh in making your decisions. If you have a direct financial interest in a transaction or matter that is being voted on by this body, you must recuse yourself. That is a straight-up conflict of interest. You have to recuse yourself. If you don't, there's possible criminal action could be taken, and the action of the board could be undone if your vote was enough to change the outcome. But that requires a financial interest. So if it's your project that's going up for a variance, you're not supposed to vote on it. If you own a piece of the project that's going up for a variance or the matter being voted on, you're not supposed to vote on it. All right, so direct financial interest is a clear conflict and you need to recuse. There are other matters and other ways your participation can be called into question, but you're not required to recuse. So if you have a familial relationship or an employee-employer relationship with someone who is approaching the board for some favorable action, it may be beneficial for you to step aside and let someone else do that because it calls into question, well, it raises the appearance of impropriety. All right, so that is not a requirement in the law. It is not a requirement that you step aside on those things. And in fact, it's just simply something you should think about. The countervailing thing you also have to think about is you've been appointed to do a job. You have special expertise that is being brought to bear for doing this job, and you have a responsibility to do it. So your duty to act and your duty to hear the matters has to be balanced by the appearance. So, the way an appearance could rise is if your child were to come to you and say, I have this property and I want to develop it in a certain way and it requires a variance, it would probably look bad if you were to vote on it, right? You don't have any interest in it, except, you want your child off the payroll, and perhaps this will help them get there, but in all likelihood, you don't have any interest, so you would not be required. Now, if your child was also two other members' grandchild, and you all had a familial relationship, then the board would be unable to act. And in that instance, if you all stepped aside, then you would be unable to act and we can't go forward. So you have a duty to hear things if you don't have that direct responsibility. You also have a duty to think about what the appearances are and try to make sure that your decision is not, doesn't give people grounds to distrust the body. So that's the guidance I can give you on that. To my knowledge, none of you have a direct financial interest in the matters that are being brought to you today, so you don't have a direct requirement to recuse yourselves. This is a small town and we all have relationships. Many of you have relationships to the people who will be arguing in front of you today. That's just the nature of living where we live. So that's the best I can give to you. The third thing I should tell you is you should not use recusal as a way to avoid a political hot potato. You got the job, you were appointed to do the job with the recognition that there were going to be some tough calls. And you may have to make a tough call today. You may upset neighbors, or you may upset city staff, or you may direct a policy change or affirm a policy that's going to have ramifications for development across the city. Whatever you do, everybody will adjust. And whatever you do, if people wish to continue arguing, they will find a venue to argue. And there are venues for your decision to be appealed for whatever decision you reach today. So with that, if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them. And I wish you all good luck today.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for our city attorney from the board regarding recusal? No? Okay, you're all comfortable here? Okay. That being said, I'm going to call our applicants to the podium to speak as to recusal only, that topic only. So I'll start with Mr. Blackburn. And Mr. Blackburn, even though I'll have you do this later, if you will, please state your first, last name, and your address.
Yeah, Philip Blackburn, 819 Logansport Street. I don't have anything to say about the recusal. I'm satisfied.
Thank you very
with the
much.
board.
Thank you. Ms. Costilla? Also, if I can have your first, last name, and address, please.
Pat Costello, 1009 Logansport Street. I have no problem with the recusal question at present here.
Thank you very much. And anyone from city? Thank you. Okay. Okay. Moving on, we're going to move to the public hearing section. And again, this is an appeal, which is a little different from our traditional variance hearings. So I'm going to read you just a quick introduction to kind of bring your brain to the space it needs to be in, because we're used to hearing our applicants in a different order in this committee. So in the matters presented today, the ZBA is a Board of Appeals of decisions by the city planner. The appeals to the Board of Adjustments may be taken by any person aggrieved or any officer, department, or board of the city affected by any decision of the city planner. In exercising the powers set out in this section, the Board of Adjustments may, in conformity with any provisions of the state law, reverse or affirm wholly or partly, or may modify the order, requirement, decision, or determination as ought to be made, and to that end shall have all the powers of the city planner from whom the action, the appeal, is taken. Positive action requires an affirmation vote by at least 4 of the 5 members. ZBA decisions are final, and recourse from ZBA decision is to a court of law. Pursuant to ZBA Rules 6.032, the board will make such interpretation as ought to be made provided the applicant has demonstrated to the satisfaction of the board that one or more of the following conditions exist and that the decision of the board would be in the interest of the community and would carry out the spirit and intent of the zoning regulations. So item A, 1, that there is reasonable doubt or difference of interpretation as to the specific intent of the regulations or map. B, that an appeal of use provisions would clearly permit a use which is in character with the uses enumerated for the various zones and with the objectives of the zone in question. And C, that the resulting interpretations will not grant a special privilege to one property inconsistent with other properties or similarly situated. So for items scheduled for a public hearing, the board will first hear the applicants, then we will hear from staff, then the residents will have the opportunity to come up and comment on our agenda items. We are only commenting on agenda items. In accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, members of the board shall not discuss, deliberate, or make decisions on topics not posted on this agenda item. Speakers should state their name and full address for the record and address all remarks to the board. The board asks that the public remarks be limited to 3 minutes, please. And we will move on to our public hearing items. So, we have 2 public hearing items, okay? Our public hearing items, and for the purposes of this appeal, I'm going to read them as item 4B. So our introduction was listed as item 4A, which is a little different from our traditional agenda. So item 4B and item 4C. So item 4B for public hearing, consider a request for an appeal of the decision of the city planner and interpreting the zoning ordinance section 118-202, continuing non-conforming use, and section 118-466, off-street parking requirements as it applies to a building permit submitted for the construction of duplexes at 1102 Logansport Street. This request has been submitted by Philip Blackburn and is case file ZBA 2023-02. Our item 4C for public hearing is consider a request for an appeal of the decision of the city planner and interpreting the zoning ordinance section 118-202, continuing non-conforming use, and section 118-466, off-street parking requirements, as it applies to the building permit submitted for the construction of duplexes at 1102 Logansport Street. This request has been submitted by Pat Costella, case file ZBA 2023-03. And since items 4B and 4C are verbatim the same appeal request, but submitted by 2 separate applicants, we will be combining these 2 items for discussion purposes, but our board will vote on them separately. And that's for our discussion purposes. They will present independent of each other. Okay, so we will start with our public hearing, and we will begin with our applicants. Mr. Blackburn, would you like to begin? Great.
Got a box full of printouts. Would y'all like hard copies of the PowerPoint so you can see the pages and maybe make notes on them if you want?
Do we have them in our binder?
I mean, I've got them right here.
If you have them, then we'll take them. Yes, please. Thank you.
I did have a question about a point of order. My understanding is the way it works is the applicants go, then the city goes, and then the applicants have a chance to rebut. Is that the rules and procedures?
That is correct. Oh, here we go. Sorry. So how this will actually go is we will hear you as an applicant. We will hear the staff. We will hear our, we will hear our public, we will allow for public comment as well. You will have an opportunity to rebut, and for board purposes, you have a pad with you because we are going to hold your questions until the end so that we're able to hear the argument in its entirety. Okay, so please make sure to make notes for any questions you may have. But yes, you will have the opportunity to rebut, both you and Ms. Costello.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, what I was thinking, we were thinking about doing, make sure this is okay, is that I would speak first and then Pat would speak first, and that would be the applicant portion of it.
That's correct.
And then we'd move to the staff. Okay.
Yes,
cool.
correct.
Well, let's get started. We're talking about 1102 Logansport Street. And in specific, our concern is about the zoning ordinance, section 118-202, continuing a non-conforming use. And when I looked up this property, I looked up the deed for the property. As you can see, the property is very old. It goes back to 1892. And kind of a historic property. This Frank and Ellen Walton were an African-American family that was very involved with the Zion Hill Baptist Church. As a matter of fact, they donated the property there on Park Street, where the cemetery is, and where that vacant lot is next to the cemetery, next to the bridge on Park Street. That was another location for the Zion Hill Baptist Church before they built one on Lanana Street. So it goes back to 1892, and it gives the calls for the survey in this deed, and from that you can do a calculation of the lot depth. And I know it involves a little trig there, but that's it. It's 89.092 feet deep, okay? Well, we looked at that and we said, hey, that doesn't conform to any district standard. And if you look at our district standards over there in section 118-427, I didn't print them all. It would be very long, but I printed out the residential ones and the agricultural. And if you look at the entire list, there's no district standard that is less than 100 feet. So we consider this a non-conforming lot. Under section 118-202, the non-conforming use of land existing at the time of the effective date of the ordinance from which this chapter derives may continue as follows. In section A, there is a thing of concern, expansion of non-conforming use of land. That says a non-conforming use of land shall not be expanded or extended. You can't do anything with it. Well, we made this complaint to the city, and they came back with us with a couple of their own interpretations of the ordinances, the first one being section 118-201. And I have it in bold there. If the city or other governmental agency takes an act or action which transforms a previously conforming structure or lot of record in terms of the city's previous ordinance, or the minimum requirements in this division, or in Division 1 of Article 6 of this chapter, such structure or lot shall be deemed to be in conformance with this division. And Article 6 of this chapter, they're saying it is in conformance, okay? It isn't a non-conforming lot. And I have to say that sentence there is very complicated. I actually copied that sentence and put it into Word and did a spelling and grammar check, and it came up at a Flesch-Kincaid level of 29. That's like postgraduate 2 or 3 times. I think that's part of the problem. But we'll see if we can't decipher that sentence. They also came at us with section 118-423, and it's in bold. They said that you can issue, well, up at the top, no permit for construction of a building upon any tract or plot shall be issued until a building site, building tract, or building lot has been created by compliance with one of the following conditions. And the condition they're outlining here is the condition 3. It says, unplatted prior to ordinance or annexation. The plot, tract, or lot faces upon a dedicated street and was separately owned prior to the effective date of the ordinance from which this chapter derives, or prior to the annexation to the city, whichever is applicable. So they're claiming that since this plot, this lot, faces a dedicated street, that they can issue a building permit for it, basically. Well, let's get into both of these and see if we can figure out what the problem with that interpretation is. Firstly, it's that part of the sentence that I have highlighted there. Transforms a previously conforming structure or lot of record in terms of the city's previous ordinance. In other words, from their take on this ordinance, by its very writing, this lot had to conform to some ordinance. okay? And then the city took some action which made it non-conforming. And because it was the city doing that, they're gonna give it a pass and say, okay, we're gonna still consider you to be conforming. So my big question is, I wanna know what ordinance, city ordinance, this lot ever conformed to. Because it doesn't conform to our city ordinance now. And that's one of the questions I have. Okay, so that's the first problem with it. And when you start digging into this, they've referred back to this original ordinance time and again, ordinance number 26. City of Nacogdoches zoning ordinance number 26, September 8th of 1970. That's it. It's still out there. I don't think they have a copy of it, to be honest. I went to the library, SFA library, and they had to dig in the back. It was back in the back. I heard them back there rummaging around for about 30 minutes. And they shook it twice and turned it upside down, and they came up with this. And so this is the original ordinance right here, 1970. Or you can get a copy of it. I told them it wasn't digital, which was a problem, I think. A lot of people would like to read this ordinance. So they're in the process right now of digitizing this and creating a PDF so that everybody can read this. Oop. Well, if you go into this original, this is the first zoning ordinance for Nacogdoches. It was a little klutzy because they actually have a section 9 on minimum lot area, a section 10, minimum lot width, and then this section here that I'm looking at, minimum lot depth. They broke them all out into separate sections, okay? Over the years, we've kind of consolidated things together, but in the original ordinance, all these things were broken out separately. It even goes into another section, minimum front yard, minimum side yard, minimum rear yard. Over the years, we kind of combined those all into one section, and like in that previous like this. See, in this slide, they have all the widths and lots and minimum setbacks, front, rear, all consolidated together. I guess is the point I'm making there. But didn't start where I wanted to. Here we go. Get back to where we were. So in this minimum lot depth section, I want to focus on this one because that's the problem with this lot. It's only 89.01 feet deep. It's plenty wide area, all that kind of stuff is not a problem. It's this minimum lot depth. And I've kind of zoomed in on the different areas of it. First thing there is about the general statement. So what they're saying is that when the city enacted this original zoning ordinance, that anything that wasn't conforming was just given a free pass. That's what they're saying. Because the city was taking this action, the action being the enactment of this zoning ordinance. And they're saying because the city did that, then anything before, since the city was making all these things non-conforming, well, then we're just going to say they're conforming. I mean, that's kind of what we're dealing with here. But now we're looking at the original ordinance, and what does it say? Except for, as hereinafter provided, no building or structure or part thereof shall be erected, altered, or converted for any use permitted in the district in which it is located, unless it is in conformity with the minimum regulations for the lot depth as specified in the following schedules. They're not giving anything a pass. It's saying from get-go, 1970, from here on, everything has to be conforming, or it's going to be labeled as non-conforming. And there's the original chart. You won't find anything in there less than 100 feet, just like it is today, including this R4. And even when it started, this lot was started out as R2. Minimum lot depth in 1970 was 100 feet. So this lot started out as non-conforming, it was not given a free pass. And they go into a statement here about one of the things you might could use it for. A lot having less depth than herein required, which was a lot of record prior to the adoption of this ordinance. This record goes back to 1892, okay? May be used for single-family dwelling. So they did have an exception. You know, if you want to use it for a single-family dwelling, you can use it for that. That's what it was being used for all these years. Then they protect things. They say, okay, no lot existing on the effective date of this ordinance shall be reduced in depth below the minimum requirements set forth herein, except for otherwise provided. And the otherwise, this is the last one, and I think this is one that's really key. A lot of record reduced in depth to less than herein required by reason of the widening of an abutting street by the city of Nacogdoches or other governmental agency may be used for residential purposes. In such instances, the minimum lot depth requirements shall be computed on the original lot dimensions prior to the street widening. That's what they're talking about in the section we're reading today. If you start with a lot that's conforming, say this lot originally had been 100 feet deep and was conforming to the original 1970s standard, and the city came in there and widened the street and lopped off about 10 or 15 feet of that 100, that's when you get the free pass. Because the city was doing this or some other government agency, they're going to consider that lot to still be 100 feet and still be in conformance. It started in conformance. The city took some action that was going to make it non-conforming, but they're going to continue to consider that to be conforming. Also, in that 1970 original ordinance, there's the same section like we have today for non-conforming uses. What are you going to do with them? Because you're going to have a bunch of non-conforming stuff there when you first start. And what we have there is the same thing that we're looking at. The non-conforming use of land, this is the section 202. Non-conforming use of land existing at the time of the effective date of this ordinance may continue as hereinafter provided. A non-conforming use of land shall not be extended or extended. So if it was labeled at the get-go as non-conforming, this ordinance applies. You can't do anything with it. And you can go get a variance, okay? But you just on your own, you can't do anything with it. So what we believe is that the city planner's interpretation is wrong, and for several reasons. You know, when cities adopted their planning ordinances, there was a couple of different avenues you could take. One avenue, if you were a city, a pretty new city, and you didn't have very much stuff that was going to be non-conforming when you enacted your ordinance, you would give those a free pass. Because if you don't, then you're going to have to be worried about that stuff forever, you know? So if it's just a very small amount, they would give them a free pass. That type of system is called a lot of record savings clause. That's the word I'm looking for. Lot of record savings clause. They would give everything that they wanted to at the beginning a free pass to where they didn't have to mess with it anymore. And typically that was done in cases where the amount of non-conforming stuff was pretty small. So it wasn't any skin off their teeth. Now in a case of like Nacogdoches, we're the oldest town in Texas, okay? Whenever this zoning ordinance started in 1970, there was a mountain of non-conforming buildings, non-conforming lots. So you take a different route in a case like that. In a situation like that, you have the system of, okay, on day one, we're going to split everything up. Here's the conforming stack, here's the non-conforming stack. The non-conforming stack will be grandfathered. Whatever's happening on that lot right now, you can continue that use. But if you want to change it, add to it, do whatever, now you're going to have to get a variance. You're going to have to talk to us about that. But so you've got two different camps. And so in a system like that, you have a grandfathered section of your code, just like we do in here. In the other system, you don't have a grandfathered section in the code. Because right here, I mean, why would you need a grandfathering section in the code? So the city planner has conflated those two different systems. We're the system where you have conforming and non-conforming and grandfathering. We aren't the system where you have, you know, a lot of record savings clause. This is getting back to that thing about the things that can actually happen in the future. You know, 118-201, the one they say that actually gave everything a free pass. You know, the thing is about grandfathering, you know, the whole goal of the system of where you have conforming and non-conforming and grandfathering is ultimately you want to bring order to the system of chaos. You would like to get rid of all these grandfathering things. You know, grandfathering is not a permanent thing like the lot of record savings clause. That's a free pass. You don't have to worry about that. There's a house behind my house that was built in the 60s. So this is right before this ordinance came into effect. Where the water, I measured this, it recently sold, so the survey stakes are still out there. They're renovating the house. And so I go out there, where the water runs off the roof, where it hits the ground, I measured, it's 20 inches, less than 2 feet. Before 1970, you could build right up to the property line, okay? No standards. Now, that's fine with that house. It can stay like that forever, unless if that house were to burn down, or a tornado could pick it up and destroy it, or a meteorite hit it, that's where you're gonna go. They couldn't rebuild that house like that. The grandfathering ceases. They would have to rebuild that house on the current zoning standard, setbacks, all of that. Okay, so grandfathering is not a forever thing like a free pass is on a savings clause. And that's what this is talking about right here. It begins if the city takes an action. So they're talking about some action that's taken after this original zoning ordinance was put into effect. Something like widening the street. You have a conforming lot, city takes an action, we're still going to consider that to be conforming. Whereas we have a whole section on grandfathering. That's the section 2, the 118-202. What do you do with all these things that are non-conforming? Have a whole section on it. And in our section on non-conforming, it deals with non-conforming lots, says you can't expand them or extend them. Well, let's look at this other one here that they said supported their interpretation. This one's almost funny to me, you know, because it demonstrates, you know, I'm 62 years old and lived here all my life, and so I'm not going to say I've seen it all, but I've seen a lot in Nacogdoches. And this thing right down here, it says a plot tract that faces upon a dedicated street. You know what a dedicated street is, right? A dedicated street is where the city has a deed. This has been deeded to the city by someone, okay? Logansport Street isn't a dedicated street, okay? On my original survey of my property that goes back to 1906, it called it Logansport Road. You know, Logansport Street used to connect with Logansport Road. You'd still go down there to Lenana Creek and see the pilings for the bridge where Logansport Street used to cross Lenana Creek. And it connected kind of back in behind, it's on Cardinal Street. You can see where it used to come out. Logansport Road is probably older than Nacogdoches, okay? There's no deed. This is what you call a implied dedicated street. You know, the city doesn't have a deed to that street. I guess I could go out there and do a quick claim. I'd probably get in a legal battle with the city. Or worse, I would end up owning Logansport Street and then have to fix that storm sewer that just collapsed down there that's going to cost about $1 million to fix. So maybe I won't go out there and claim that street. I'll let the city keep on taking care of it. But, you know, this is the thing that you run into with the Supreme Court. When the Supreme Court is ruling on some law, they have to take the law as it's written. You know, you're not supposed to try to read the mind of the people that wrote the law. And if they didn't write the law, if they weren't very good at writing, then sometimes it comes back to, this doesn't say anything about limited or a implied dedicated street. You know, it should have been right here, upon a dedicated street / implied dedicated street. This, according to this right here, you would need a variance to build anything on Logansport Street because it's not a dedicated street. You could almost use this as ammunition against issuing a building permit because Logansport Street is not dedicated. Moreover, that ordinance doesn't negate 118-202, you know, which these ordinances kind of work together in unison. Just because you have a ordinance that says, hey, you can issue a permit if it faces a dedicated street, let's play like you're including implied dedicated streets. you still have to take into account 118.202. Is this a conforming or is it non-conforming? So clearly, the other ordinance still applies. Otherwise, you could issue a building permit for a lot that's only 10 feet deep. If you're just going to go with that one ordinance, you have to look at the sum of the ordinances and how they interact with each other. Clearly, that ordinance is talking about conforming streets, conforming lots, I mean. Okay. That kind of finishes up the part about the lot itself, as far as it's conforming or non-conforming, and getting into the other issue about the parking. This ordinance 118.466 covers if you're building something, what kind of parking requirements do you have for what the thing you're building. And I guess it would be good to look at a few of these definitions because they're pretty important. You know, section 118.1, it defines words that are used all throughout the section on zoning, okay? Much to my surprise, there is not a definition for a duplex. You know, we have a definition for family in the code. When it mentions family, what does it mean? Well, a family, any number of individuals living together as a single housekeeping unit in which not more than two individuals are unrelated by blood, marriage, or adoption. So that's what in the code, in the zoning code, when it says family, that's what it means. I mean, they went through and defined, there must be over 100 words that were defined, so you could be clear when you mention this term in an ordinance, what are you talking about? Two-family dwelling, this is very important, means a detached building having two dwelling units and occupied by not more than two families. So that puts us back up to family. What's meant by a family? There's what they mean by family, right there. Multifamily apartments means any building or portion thereof which is designed, built, rented, leased, or let to be occupied as three or more dwelling units or apartments, or which is occupied as a home or residence of three or more families. Okay. The thing about duplexes is that a duplex is kind of like a chameleon. If you have a duplex in an R3 zoning, then it's a two-family dwelling, as defined here. R3 is about two-family dwellings. And you could have like Opie and Sheriff Andy Taylor on one side, and Leave It to Beaver and his family, just a nice, cozy families living in this duplex next to each other. On the other hand, if you have a duplex in an R4 area, and this has happened before. I mean, we use this term duplex. We joke about it. I'm in real estate. My brother and I own rental property. We have a duplex. It changes into something else in an R4. We own a property on the corner of McKechnie and Pearl Street. We purchased it from Wendell Spreadberry. And Wendell told us that in the early 80s, when they built out like the apartments on the Loop out there and Whisper Oaks and all, we were overbuilt for a period of time. And everybody was singing the blues because there were vacancies all over town. He had the bright idea in that duplex. He went in there, and he was trying to, they were vacant. He was trying to get those things rented. He put bunk beds in all the bedrooms, okay? He had that duplex. He had 12 students, like it was a dormitory. That's allowed in multifamily. And from the definition here, multifamily apartments, this project that we're talking about at the end of Logansport Street, since it's an R4, it is a multifamily apartment. It is not duplexes, okay? They're not two-family units. I mean, you can't even use the word duplex from this. It's either, multifamily apartments, that's what it is, because that's what you can do with it. You're not restricted. There's no deed restriction that says that he can only rent those things to families. It's not in the zoning. The zoning allows him to rent those things out to however many college students will fit in there. I mean, I think Wendell probably could have fit some more students in that duplex he had. He had a dozen, and there were cars parked all over. Forget the parking lot that was there at that duplex. They were parked all out in the yard. You know, there's nothing to prevent you in an R4 from putting duplexes in the bedrooms and cramming as much in there as you can, because there's no thing in the zoning or in the deed that says you can't do that. You can have unrelated people in there. Well, let's start looking at the project after we see what some of these definitions actually entail. This is kind of small. I've got it here on a big sheet, but I don't know if y'all studied this very close, but you can look at this one. The first thing I noticed about it, which was kind of squirrely to me, was they got every kind of dimension in there you can look at. They got the size of the buildings and all this kind of thing. They even, I think, might even have the length of that lot. But I stood on my head, I looked at it sideways, upside down, right side. There is no way to determine the depth of that lot from that site plan. I've never seen a site plan like that. I believe that they didn't know whether or not we knew that that lot was only 89 feet deep and non-conforming. So they sure weren't going to show their cards on that drawing because Kathleen Bellinger wanted to see the drawings as soon as they were submitted. So they knew that we were going to scrutinize the drawings. And looking at this drawing here, you show me how you can measure the depth of that lot. It's impossible. We've got the big version here if you want to look at it. So I found that very curious. Kind of the red, light comes on and the lights start blinking. And let's zoom in on that top part. I've actually zoomed in on that part so you can see it. Kind of gives you a breakdown of what's going on at this development. This was done by 215 Consulting. And they've got a breakdown of what it is. They show, it's zoned R4, multifamily residential. Bedroom count, that's very important right there. Bedroom count, 12, okay? Multifamily residential. Number of parking spaces provided, 12, okay? Well, that looks right. But then you flip the page in all these plans over here, and this pops up. This is the floor plan, which I hasten to add was done by somebody other than 215, okay? And it kind of begs the question, can 215, they don't have the software, they're not capable of drawing out a floor plan? They got all this site plan going on here, and we're going to use someone else to do the floor plan, okay? Well, let's look at this floor plan. Let's start counting up the bedrooms. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you've got 3 of these duplex units. 3 times 6, 18. Wait a minute, back over here it said we only had 12. So out of one side of the developer's mouth, he's telling 215, draw up your plans with only 12 bedrooms, okay? And then at the same time, when he presents this stuff to the city, it's got a different plan in here for the floor plans that's got more bedrooms. I mean, who does stuff like that, all right? That's very, I don't know what to call it. Anyway, because, it's 215, do they not know how to calculate things? This was another plan that was deliberated. This one has a 3-plex and 2 duplexes. And look at this. They must have been told that each one of these were going to have 3 bedrooms. Because look at that triplex. If you had a triplex there and they each had 3 bedroom, 2 baths, you would need a parking space for each bedroom. So you'd need 9. And you look over to the left there, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They calculate it like you're supposed to from the ordinances. Same thing on these duplexes over here. You got a duplex here, you got 2 duplexes. So if it's got 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, you're going to need 6 parking places for each one. Well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. They know how to count, and they know how to read the ordinance. But when it comes to this development, when we pointed out to them that the site plan did not match the floor plan, they said, oh, that's just a minor detail. All it's still going to need are the 12 parking places. So this plan only calls for 12 parking places for all those duplexes, and then 2 more they've got there for the house. There's still a house there, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. So what's going on here? You go to our section on this topic, off-street parking requirements, 118-466. Figure 3 down there. Do you see down there in Figure 3 anywhere? This is much longer. This thing is 8 pages, by the way. I just cut and pasted the part that had to do with the residential. And do you see the word duplex in there anywhere? They don't use the word duplex, okay? Almost duplex is like a joking word in the real estate community. There's a house around the corner from me. Well, there's a lot around the corner from me. It's on the section of Houston Street that cuts between Mound and King Street. Used to be a vacant lot. It was owned by the Carrolls. And Dr. Carroll and his wife at that time lived on Mound Street. They're across from the Chamberlain building. Big Victorian house, and they wanted to downsize. So the plan was they were going to sell their house on Mound Street and build a house on the vacant lot over there on Houston Street. They put their house on the market, sat there on the market for year after year. I think it'd been on the market for maybe 5 years, and they couldn't sell it. So they said, we'll just ditch that plan. We'll just go with Plan B. We'll just write it out right here where we live on Mound Street. So they put their lot up for sale. And a developer approached them about buying that lot, and they were kind of concerned about the neighborhood. It was zoned R4. And they asked him, and says, what do y'all plan on doing with this lot? Oh, we're going to build a duplex. You know? Well, what's there now? It's a 15-unit condominium complex, okay? Because, they just told them to. And my brother and I, when we would see stuff like this, we'd see something going on in a neighborhood. Oh, they must have told them they were just going to build a duplex, and we start laughing, okay? A duplex is a word that's almost is like a laughing word in the real estate community. You don't see duplex on there anywhere. So how are we going to classify this development out there? Is it a bunch of two-family dwellings like they're wanting to calculate it on? They're only assigning 2 parking places per building, as if these are all two-family dwellings. No, we just saw in the code there where having all these unrelated people in that same building by our own code. Let's go back to it. By our own code, multifamily. Let's say you had one of those duplexes there. They're 3 bedrooms each. Let's just say you had 1 student in each bedroom, okay? So you got 6 students that aren't related to each other. By our own definition, that is a multifamily apartment. I don't care what it's laid out as far as, read the definition of that. Any building, it doesn't say if it's a duplex or a triplex or whatever, which is designed blah, 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 and where it has 3 or more families in there. Well, 6 college students that aren't related, that's 6 families, okay? So that's why we don't use that term over here where we're trying to figure out the parking places. These are not two-family dwellings. That thing doesn't like me. Let's go back to it. Here it is. This, by our own ordinances, is defined as a multifamily parentheses apartments. So you have to use the multifamily apartments definition in order to calculate the number of parking spaces needed for this development. And when you run out the math, it's like it's over 20. So the conclusions, what do we do about this? Well, the first conclusion I have is that since this lot started out as non-conforming use of land, and it is still a non-conforming use of land, the city never took any action that transformed it, from a conforming to non-conforming. It started non-conforming, been non-conforming the whole time. Section 118.202.3A applies, and it mandates that a non-conforming use of land shall not be expanded or extended. They're trying to expand it. There could be no building permit issued for a non-conforming lot without receiving a variance from the Zoning Board of Adjustments. Okay? That's as far as what to do about the first item. Second item, about the parking, 118.1 defines a two-family dwelling. A building having 2 dwelling units and occupied by not more than 2 families. There's no deed restriction, there's no zoning that's going to enforce that. You can put as many students in those things as it'll fit, okay? So those are not two-family dwellings. The proposed duplexes are not restricted to being occupied by two families because they're located in R4. 5 or more unrelated students will be permitted in each duplex. Building permits should not be approved with only 14 parking spaces because 22. There's also in our code a provision for visitors, okay? So it kind of ups the number of spaces you need. It's not just one parking place per bedroom. You also have to have accommodation for visitors. Based on our ordinances, this project requires 22 parking spaces. So what do you do? I mean, we're not asking for much here. We're not saying go fire everybody and blah, blah, blah. What has to happen here is he has to go and apply for variances. That's not a big deal. I mean, that's what y'all do. All that needs to happen to cure this situation we have here is say, you know, that's a non-conforming lot. You're going to have to apply for a variance in order to do anything with it. And then if he gets a variance, then if he wants to only have 14 parking places there, he's going to have to get a variance for that. Otherwise, he's going to have to change his building plans and make it to where it conforms with our zoning ordinances. So we're not asking a whole lot here. All we want to happen here is for the city to abide by its own ordinances. That's what we're asking. All right.
Okay, thank you, Philip. And Philip, I do have one more question for you. Sorry, yeah. Our agenda has me ask yes or no. Are there others present here today in support of your appeal?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, and I'll now call the second applicant, Ms. Pat Costello.
Pat Costello, 1009 Logansport Street. I wrote it down because I tend to get off. Okay. I reside at 1009 Logansport Street. I am directly across from this proposed development. This has been very strange since the beginning. My husband and I purchased this home about 16 years ago because our son and grandchildren live here. When you buy a house, there's usually nothing on a deed about zoning. Zoning is a subject most people, except for the past couple of years, know nothing about. You don't buy a house and the deed doesn't say this is R2 or R4. My husband, this was supposed to be our last home. You know, we were going to stay here forever and die here. Well, my husband managed to do that, but I did not, so I'd like to stay here. When we realized from a zoning thing that happened somewhere else that we were R4, I didn't even know. Here I am knowing zoning, don't even know my house is R4. And we paid to have it turned into a subdivision. We paid to do that because, and we did not want to destroy the integrity of the neighborhood or the street. Because knowing zoning, I knew that R4, we could build a 10-story building there. I could have made a lot of money because zoning runs with the land, and zoning is where a lot of money is made. Okay, now, this is an area, because we've had all kinds of accusations, of mixed income people, mixed ethnicities, and it is a historic area. We have the documents. We found out that it was actually owned by Sam Houston. This area was owned by Sam Houston. The Waltons, which you heard about, they have owned it since 1892. It was their homestead. And this piece of land was their property until they were forced to do something about it, but that's a whole other story. And as Philip told you, they are the family that donated land for Zion Hill Baptist. There's a great deal of African-American history in this part of Logansport Street, the part across King Street, which I once was told was not a very valuable part of Logansport Street. Okay, every day I watch people, me being one of them, taking my dogs, pushing their strollers, doing their running, doing the kiddos with their bicycles. It is the start of various parties, various races, a dead-end street that goes into Pecan Park. So I guess the R4 zoning will just take that away, and I still don't understand why the city is helping a developer, because when he asked for this rezoning, he was the head of planning and zoning. He was the head of planning and zoning, and speaking of recusal, when he recused himself, the person that was running the board meeting was his coworker, who is now in business with him. None of us knew anything about the sale or the rezoning until it was in the Daily Sentinel. Yes, there was a 200-foot letter sent out, which was not properly constructed. By the way, these are all my documents that I have gotten under open records from all that has occurred on this zoning. Okay. He used his influence with the city. Remember, he's the head of planning and zoning at this time, which is in violation of the ethics laws. Okay. He was never requested to send the letter that is requested under the ordinances if you are going to make a change to the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan distinctly said this is R2, should stay R2. He was never asked to get a variance, and you've just heard all of that information why there should be a variance. I don't understand any of this. We had a petition that we delivered, signed by all of the residents of Logansport, Martinsville. Nobody paid any attention to it. It was ignored. There were hundreds of phone calls. We even had a little website, Save Logansport Street. We had about 200 or 300 people on it. Nobody cared. Here's my question. Why is our city helping a developer who does not even live in the city, who violated the very code of ethics on the board that he belonged to? Hundreds of citizens are being ignored, and they help one developer who does not even live in the city anymore. I'm 82. I am a widow. I thought this would be where I would, end my days. I know zoning regulations. When I called the developer, I was out of town. I was in Maine. And he said to me, oh, I'm going to build these to rent to college students. This is how I will do something about my retirement. Mr. Blackburn has shown you what he intends to build. And even that is not honorable because we're getting various things. Anything he does there is totally incompatible with the rest of the area. It's all family homes. It's all various people. I guess I'm, on the wrong end, but it doesn't really matter. I want to know where people are going to park. I'm sure you've all been down there. I'm sure you've all gone into the park, and we all love to go into the park. Gardner Street has been raped, and if you look at Gardner Street, what you will see are people, don't park in my driveway. Where are these cars going? Where are they going? Oh, maybe they'll extend the street. Oh, good, then our tax dollars will have to pay for it. But how will they extend the street? I don't know how this will happen. So none of it makes sense. If this development goes through, it will set a precedent. It will set a precedent for that end of Logansport Street because people will buy the properties. They will put more multifamily. Beautiful, beautiful location, and makes it easy to get to the college. You just have to run across the park. So why is this developer allowed to destroy not only a historic street that all of Nacogdoches uses on their journey to the park? I don't know, because what will happen is there'll be many multifamily units, not because of infill, which is the argument I've been given over and over, but because of profit to one at the expense of the residents. There are no parking spaces there. I know this land very well. I'm on it every day. Where are they going to put the cars? They're just ditches on the east side. Please don't let this happen. Why does this developer allow not to follow the ordinance of the city? He should have applied for a variance. He should have written a letter about the comprehensive plan. At the time this happened, the city did not have a sign in front of the property. The only notice was something about 1 inch in the back pages of the Daily Sentinel. No one knew this was happening until it appeared in the Sentinel. I don't understand it. I don't understand why he did not have to do the things that were required under our zoning ordinances. Please, don't let this happen. Please listen, and listen to our side. This developer has to apply for a variance. He should follow the written laws and the ethics required. I appreciate your listening, but this is 3 years we've been researching this. 3 years we have doing all of this with nothing but negativity from the city. So I don't know what to say. I don't understand how one person for profit can destroy a beautiful area that the whole city uses. As one woman said to me, and she was an older woman, says the old woman, that lived here all her life, if they can do this to Logansport Street, I give up. They'll do it anywhere. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Costello. And Ms. Costello, yes or no, are there any others present here today in support of your appeal?
Probably everybody in the room.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and now we'll move on to hear the staff's presentation. I'll welcome you to the podium, please. And if you also will state your name, position.
Elena Hilton, City Planner. Thank you, Chairwoman.
And again, the board is instructed to hold all of your questions and comments. We're going to have those at the end, so please continue to take notes. Thank you.
All right, so I'll try not to be redundant, but I'm going to repeat just a couple of things that you mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. This is an appeal that and it is an allegation that there was an error in the determination or application of the requirements of the zoning regulations by the city planner. That is, whether the decision of the city planner that the building permit for 1102 Logansport Street is compliant with the zoning ordinance. This appeal is not a request for a variance where the board may ignore the literal wording of the zoning ordinance. And so the question before you this afternoon is whether there was an error in my determination of the requirements of the zoning regulations, specifically as it applies to the building permit submitted for the 3 duplexes at 1102 Logansport Street. The sections in question are Section 118-202, nonconforming uses, and Section 118-466, off-street parking requirements. So I know that the board knows a lot about zoning, but for the benefit of those watching at home and for the benefit of the audience, I would like to take a couple of minutes and just provide some background information about zoning regulations and how we apply those to the city development. And so, again, the city is divided into groupings of similar types and land uses known as zoning districts. The districts vary. They include residential, commercial, industrial, medical, agricultural. Permissible uses of land are established for each zoning district, and then development standards are established for each district, i.e. building setbacks, parking, landscaping, et cetera. So that's kind of general overview of how zoning works inside the city. Essentially, these tell you what and where you can build within the city limits. Now, our Nacogdoches zoning ordinance in Article 2, administration, that speaks to, again, the literal administration of the zoning ordinance and provides general information. It includes the nonconforming section that Mr. Blackburn just mentioned. And essentially, the section states that a nonconforming lot, building, or use of property is one that was created legally under the city regulations at the time that it was established, but because of subsequent changes in those regulations, is no longer compliant with city code. This grandfathering provision allows the use to continue with specific limitations on their expansion. Staff reads this section say that lots created prior to the adoption of the zoning ordinance in 1970 are deemed in compliance with Article 6 of the ordinance, which regulates development standards. The lot in question was created prior to 1963, therefore it predates any zoning ordinance that the city ever had. Article 3. Covers district regulations. The property is zoned R4 multifamily, and this classification allows apartments, duplexes or two-family, and single-family residents to be built all within the same zone. Since the existing single-family residence is a permitted land use under the current R4 zoning classification, it is also deemed to be in compliance with city code, and it's not a non-conforming use. So at this time, I would like to address one of the comments that Mr. Blackburn made about the definitions that he provided, definition of family, two-family, and so forth and so on. So the definition of family simply speaks to the number of people living in a housekeeping unit, right? And then when you look at single-family and two-family and multifamily, those are describing the structures, right? So a single family is one building with one unit. Two-family is one building with two units, or common nomenclature is a duplex. And multifamily is 3 units in one structure. But that doesn't change the definition of family. So the no more than, I think it's a common misconception that the no more than 2 only applies to single family. It applies to every single zoning district within the city of Nacogdoches. So if you build a single-family home in a multifamily zoning district, the no more than 2 still applies. So I just wanted to provide clarification on that. And again, duplex is a common nomenclature used for two-family, and so we use those terms interchangeably. All right, so Article 6, Development Standards. The applicant also contends that the parking requirements for the building permit must be based on the maximum required under the zoning district. Staff calculates parking minimums based on the specific building, improvement, or use that is actually being constructed. We don't base it on what could be built or what the potential maximum could be built. For example, a doctor's office and a movie theater are both permitted in the B2 zoning districts, but they have very different parking requirements. The R4 district allows apartments, duplexes, and single-family residents, again, to be built in the same district. The regulations state that for a duplex or two-family structure, a minimum of 2 parking spaces are required for each dwelling unit. So one duplex with 2 units equals 4 parking spaces. For an apartment building, which is a building with 3 units or more, the parking minimum would be per the bedroom, as Mr. Phillips said, plus 5%. And so this is taken directly from the parking table. We did provide the whole section in your packet, but this is just that snippet from that section of the ordinance. And let me know if I'm going too fast. So Article 6, Development Standards, also includes requirements for issuing a building permit. It outlines that they have to meet one of these 3 criteria. And this is the property is subdivided, so it's part of a city-approved plat filed with the county, or that's part of an approved plan development site plan, or that it's unplatted prior to ordinance or annexation. So it states that the lot faces upon a dedicated street and was separately owned prior to the effective date of the ordinance, which in this case is 1970, or prior, again, to annexation. So for the ZBA rules and procedures, I want to provide a little bit of clarification. These standards are really written for scenarios where city planner denies a building permit, and so the contractor or the property owner wants to appeal that denial, and so they bring it to the board. It's more common that we receive those kind of appeals. It's less common to receive an appeal from a neighbor for approving a permit. So when you read these, they may read strange, but they're written on the premise that it's a developer or contractor submitting the appeal. But I'm going to read it aloud. So the board will make such interpretation as ought to be provided, that the applicant has demonstrated that to the satisfaction of the board that one or more of the following conditions exist. And it talks about the reasonable doubt. So is there a reasonable doubt or difference of interpretation as to the specific intent or regulations of the map? Number 2, that an appeal of use provisions would clearly permit a use which is in character with the uses enumerated in the various zones with the objection of the zone in question. So would it approve a use that's allowed in that zoning district and other similar land uses? And number 3, that the resulting interpretations would not grant a special privilege to one property inconsistent with similarly situated properties. This is the manner in which city staff have operated for years on multiple permit reviews on lots all over the city because of the age of when these lots were created prior to zoning being established. And one thing that I want to note is that I've been doing this for 9 years. I've worked in 4 different cities, and I've never seen a zoning ordinance that didn't have some sort of grandfathering clause. And that's because a lot of these rules come straight out of the state local government code. So there's a lot of things that cities can adopt in addition to that code, but a lot of the base requirements actually come from the state. And essentially, what this addresses is that, non-conforming uses and those that were created legally and then rendered non-compliant, it's a protection for those property owners, so that the city doesn't change the rules in the middle of the game and provides some predictability for development within the city. And so with that, I will conclude staff's presentation. I know we have some people in the public who want to speak, but in general, those are the requirements as staff applies them, and that concludes staff's presentation.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Chafin. Okay, now that we have concluded the applicants and staff presentation, we will move on to our open public hearing. The public will be allowed to comment, and I want to remind all speakers when they come to the microphone that I would like your first and last name, as well as your address. You will have a 3-minute time limit. And during this time, the board is not to discuss, debate, or argue an issue with the applicant, nor indicate his probable vote on the appeal. So we are here to listen to everyone in the public for their 3 minutes, and we're going to allow that time to them. Anyone in attendance that would like to speak in support or against the appeal request, this is your opportunity, so it's not one or the other. There's not a rule on one or the other, so it's for or against and in any order. So I'm opening public comment now, and I guess if you will just come up one at a time, and we'll start with you, ma'am, in the back. Good evening.
My name is Diana Walker. I'm a ghost from the past. I live at 2807 Reggae, and I know what it's like to have multi-homes with a lot of college students in it. Pine Street and Nelson Street borders my house. But my main concern is the integrity of that street. I was chairman of the Durst Taylor House. I was chairman of Historic Sites for years. But if you allow that complex to be built, the value of those homes are going to go down. I've seen it in my neighborhood. I worked the CVB this past Saturday as a volunteer, and I cannot tell you how many people came in wanting to know the history of Nacogdoches. And Ronald Reagan said, if you lose your history, you lose your country. And we don't want it to be a precedent. Because if we allow that, then if somebody else comes in and wants to do it someplace else, well, then we have to say, he'll say, well, you've already allowed it on Logansport Street. We have to keep our history. That's what's so important to making Nacogdoches the oldest town in Texas. And I'm just asking you to think about the people who have invested their lives in those homes. And I know what it is to live with a college student. With a bunch of them around you. Parties, there are too many cars. They park on the street when they're not supposed to park. There's loud music, and so it's constant all the time. And I just thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and talk to you. But just remember that it is so important that we keep our history. Oh, I was on the last master plan committee, and it was in our master plan that property was to stay R2, and it was not to be touched. And I agree, a man that lives out of town, comes in and is on the P&Z, should not have been allowed to make that request. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Walker. And who's keeping time for me? I'm sorry. Are you keeping time? One? Okay, just want to make sure. Thank you. And next, please.
Hello,
Good evening.
my name is Zeke Martinez. I live at 907 Logansport Street, located right at the corner of King and Logansport. I've been there close to 40 years. We've developed, kept up with the property as much as we can, try to keep it nice and clean and presentable. My concern has always been, and I've I spoke to it before, is the amount of regular traffic that has increased exponentially since I've lived there. It's a very common use street, all the way from North Street, across King Street, down to where we live at the corner, goes back to Martinsville Street, and then up to University. That is a very, very busy intersection. I would be glad to share some of the videos that I have of the traffic and the things that we get to see on a daily basis. I have also noticed, or I have seen parties close by from maybe college people, I'm not sure, but apartments and so forth right close. So my concern is the increased traffic, along with the safety factor, where you go down Logansport to the park in that area where the development is supposed to be going up, and there's not enough room for emergency vehicles to get down there. I know because that's what I did for a living for 40 years. It's very congested, very small streets. Wood Street is going to need to be somehow fixed, along with the end of Logansport. So those are my concerns. And again, the taxpayer money is being used for this, so I think you should listen to the taxpayers in this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Hello, sir. Good
Howdy.
evening.
My name is Baron McLemore. I'm really a nobody. I moved over from St. Augustine, but Ronald Reagan, quote him again, said there's no limit to how far a man can go as long as he cares not who gets the credit. So I'm not trying to take credit for anything. I'm going to use some figures here. What he just said was a great segue to what I want to say about this. And I, too, want to talk about the taxpayers. Not bragging on myself, but bragging on my dad and some of the things that he's done. How I've come about this is my dad and I were the developers of Austin Hills subdivision. Right now, there's probably 40 to 45 houses in there. If you take that at y'all are in real estate, most of y'all, $250,000, $300,000 each house. That's probably $12 million worth of stuff on the tax rolls. The Senior Citizen Center was my dad's church up there. When he passed away and left nobody to take care of it, I was appointed receiver to sell it, sold it to the Senior Citizen Center, donated the money off to other nonprofits. So I think I come at this from a developer standpoint and seeing, plus a taxpayer standpoint. The one thing I'd like to say is $45,607.63 was my tax bill last year. So I'm looking for help with things that like Mr. Bohack's trying to do to help. I want to increase the tax base so that our taxing entities do not have to increase their tax rates. You know, this is something he will not get any kind of tax money on, will not get any kind of, it'll be taxed at 100% of the value on that. The other thing I want to say is when I spoke about the Senior Citizen Center, when we went through the zoning changes for the Senior Citizen Center to be allowed to go into the church building, myself, Ron Collins, and R.J. Bohack were the three items that were voted on by the Planning and Zoning and the City Commission all at the same time. He did nothing out of the ordinary. He walked away from this. He tried to have no undue influence. I was there. I was watching. I was included in all of this. We've got a unique opportunity in Nacogdoches with the takeover of UT coming in. There's prime development that needs to happen in Nacogdoches. We've got this unique opportunity. He did everything by the book. You know, it's been discussed, rediscussed by many members of the city people. All of those people are still employed. If they did something wrong, they should have been fired, in my opinion. They're still here saying it was correct. The things that he did were correct. So don't send a message that Nacogdoches is still closed for business. Send a message that we want development. We need development. We're pleading, you know, business owners, developers are pleading for business.
Thank you, Mr. McLemore. Next, please. Is there anyone else here for public comment? Thank you, sir. Good evening.
Hi. First and last and address, please.
David Meyer, 817 Martinsville Street. And I don't live there, but I'm talking as someone who owns the property and as a landlord and has a duplex there over the past 30 years that I have rented. And just in regards to the area or the street itself has come a long way in regards to what it was when I was had first bought it, in regards to the structures that were there. And a builder came in several years ago and really started building some really nice single-family homes on the street, kind of catty corner around to where mine is. And it really, I think, made a big difference in regards to the values and such like that of the existing properties. And so, you know, I speak as a landlord because I try and be very judicious who I have in there, you know, at the time. And I can tell you it's very embarrassing when I'm getting notifications from the neighbors and such like that the police have been out, you know, to the residents because of some disturbance or something going on. And it really, you know, I feel like, oh my God, you know, I feel like I have such a responsibility for one thing. And I live in the county, so I'm able to kind of keep an eye out on things and such like that. But I just feel like, you know, I somewhat have a bone in this fight, but honestly, I just don't think it's the right thing to do, you know, in regards to having that complex there in regards to the students and things like that and the parking. And I think it's really going to be a blight, you know, to what we have going on there at the in that area itself. And my duplex actually borders to Pecan Park. There is some woods behind it, and I'm thinking that whole area back there is probably going to be, you know, if they go ahead through with this, they'll probably go ahead and start developing that, you know, right behind there. So I do have some concerns with it because it is, you know, protected, so to speak. So that's really what I wanted to say about that in regards to it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Hello, good evening.
Hi, good evening. My name is Crystal Wabarbo Stapley. The address is 1102 Garner Street. And perhaps unlike everybody else here, I really don't want to be here. I don't have, I suppose, a dog in the fight. Our property is within the 200 feet zone, and so notice was actually sent to our address of record. My husband is an officer in the Army, so we move every 24 months or so, and we lived in Virginia at the time. The notification went to Virginia while we were in Texas, in Nacogdoches with our kids, where we try to be as often as we can. But even if we had received the notice, you know, when we received the notice, we sort of thought, well, we don't live on the street, it doesn't really affect us. I'm sure if people care, they will speak up. And of course, nobody, you know, because of COVID, whatever, the situation was what it was. It's been unfortunate. Because we don't really have a strong opinion, I felt it was important, and I was encouraged to come present what I think is a middle view. From far away, as we've watched all this happening, a lot of people in Nacogdoches who are not speaking up have the opinion of, you know, it looks kind of slimy. I don't know Mr. Bohack. I'm sure he's a very nice man. I met his wife once at a garage sale. She was lovely. She seems like the kind of person we could be friends with. I am a lawyer, and the process of citizens believing in the government and believing in the process, I think, is critically important. And so what I think is important is giving the citizens who have voiced their concerns this chance to have the hearing they're asking for with the variance appeal, so that the people who were saying, oh yeah, it was slimy, but that's just Nacogdoches, that's just how things go. No, I don't think so. I think that there are people who are trying very hard to do the right thing and to dig in and to get the facts. And because of COVID, nobody here caused that. The circumstances were what they were. Obviously, if some of the Logansport residents, if COVID hadn't been an issue and they had actually received notice and were aware of the hearing, I think the concerns would have been voiced then. And so my interest is in the process and in the citizens of Nacogdoches having confidence in the process. And again, I don't want to be here. I'm going to go pick up my kids from the rec center now. So I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Ms. Stapley. Okay. Anyone else? Hello there. I'm doing well.
Good.
Thank you,
I am
Mr.
Ron
Collins.
Collins, 1827 York Drive here in Nacogdoches. I hadn't really prepared to speak on this. I spoke in favor of Mr. Bohack the last time that he came forward with his proposal. And I don't think that I have really honestly changed my mind on that. But I think my comment today is, having served in several capacities here recently where we've seen needs of Nacogdoches, things that we have gotten somewhat behind on over the years for not keeping up maybe with tax increases or bond issues that we might have had to do some things. We have allowed our town to get a little bit aged, more so than we should have probably. In looking back at it, nobody's to blame. We're just looking forward at this point. But we have got to accommodate and know that this city is going to grow. This city is going to grow fairly substantially over the next 10 years. We're going to have a lot of growth with SFA. I-69 is going to bring new stuff to town. General Texas economy and movement here is going to create growth as well. So we've got a lot of things that are going to dictate that we're going to see growth in Nacogdoches. A lot of it's going to be for living type things that we need to have in the city, just like Varen had said about building the tax base. We need help on building this tax base. Otherwise, all of us get to bear the brunt of, what these improvements are going to cost. So I would just say that this is a really, really important group, y'all, as the P&Z, and the appeals of that we know that we go forward and welcome some of this development because it's going to happen, and we're going to have opportunities to build this tax base. Like I said, to funnel this growth, to find opportunities in apartments, things of those natures. We're going to have to accommodate that if we have it, because SFA is not going to build new facilities on campus. They're going to look to the community or other investors to come in and build apartment units and all those kind of things. So we're going to have to be able to accept the fact that that's going to happen. So I would just again say we need to try to make every effort to try to accommodate things, grow when we can, build tax base when we can, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Hello there.
Hello.
Good evening.
My name is John Callahan. I live at 2019 Essex Street. With regard to multifamily or duplex housing units being built in residential areas, I just refer you to Pearl Street and the devaluation of single-family homes on that street over the last 20 to 30 years. You may also consider taking a look at the intersection of Pecan and East Austin. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Callahan. Okay, do we have anyone else? Yes, ma'am. Good evening.
Hi, I'm Mary McCleary. I live at 4005 Reggae. I hadn't planned to speak, but I'm inspired by this. And my word for y'all is aesthetics. Nacogdoches can grow, but if we don't keep beauty in mind, we're going to look like a mess. And we're not going to draw the people we want. We will draw the wrong kind of people. We will draw crime. We will draw all kinds of scuzzy stuff. I'm so glad to know about Mr. Martinez. Every time I drive by his house, I wonder, who owns that house? It gives me joy every time I pass by that house, because I remember when it was slummy, and he went in there and he fixed it up, and it's beautiful. He has his fence and a beautiful yard. Apartments are all over town, and they look like slums. Out-of-town landlords are there for the money, and they let them go. And the students sure aren't taking care of them. We don't need any more junk in town, especially not in nice residential areas. Please keep that in mind. Beauty, aesthetics, and growth, they're compatible.
Thank you, Ms. McCleary. Okay. Y'all are doing good. Yes, ma'am. Good evening. Hello.
My name is Elizabeth Gaudet, and I live at 200 Nottingham. I also was not planning to speak tonight, but I wanted to say that I am in support of the city and the city planner's decision. I don't think it was made hastily or under the influence of anybody, one person or any other people. I think that what Mr. Bohack, I think that's how you say his name, wants to do, as long as it is with the right permits and whatever that is perfectly fine for that area. There's already multifamily dwellings in the vicinity and two-family dwellings in the vicinity, very close. When I went to college here, I had a friend who lived in those duplexes right there in Martinsville. So I've born and raised in Nacogdoches. I'm very familiar with what goes on in here. Just because they could be rented to college students doesn't mean that's 100% what's going to happen. It could be rented to families who need housing, that can't afford a mortgage or can't get approved for one, so they still need places to live in town. I think anything that has to do with the streets is a city problem, and that should be addressed with the city to get whatever road maintenance, drainage, et cetera, that needs to be, compliant, and to deal with the traffic that will bring, in that short part of Logansport to the, I think that I just wanted to show support for this board also. I know y'all have a hard time with things like this, and I just wanted y'all to know that you do have support from people in the city. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Godet. Do we have anyone else? Yes, ma'am. Hello, good evening.
Hello, my name is Judy Kugel. I live at 3610 West Meadow, and I too did not plan on speaking, but I am a friend of Pat Castella's, and I'm in her book club, and let me just tell you how hard it is to drive down her street where she lives to even think about parking. So also, I am into historic preservation and a historic street. By the way, how could we get away with building a non-historic? It's non-historic. Anything that's grandfathered, once it's not in use, that grandfather clause goes away. Philip made a very important statement. It doesn't meet code in size, in depth. And I'm going to get a scale, and I'm going to scale that drawing and put it on there. I'm an architect. Okay, that's all I have to say. It doesn't meet code. It needs a variance.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kugel. Thank you. Okay. We're still in public hearing. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Hearing none, then we will move on. Okay. Public hearing has now been closed, and we will move forward to our applicant's opportunity for rebuttal to any of the arguments against the request made during the public comment portion. So this is your opportunity to rebut in whole, in part, or however you see fit.
Okay, again, Philip Blackburn, 819 Logansport Street. Well, just to make a few points, the city planner, again, is using duplexes and two-family interchangeably, and they're not interchangeable words. If you had a duplex with 6 or more unrelated people living in that duplex, are you going to call that two-family? I mean, a family consists of one person. So the idea that the term duplexes and two-family are interchangeable is just incorrect. Again, Logansport is not a dedicated street. And this idea that, oh, well, this is the way we've always done it, and we've done it for years, and blah, 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 is incorrect. We've talked to previous city employees who will dispute that. Moreover, a week ago, I did an open records for any case where a building permit was issued for a lot that did not meet the district standards, and it was granted without a variance. They're still looking. You would think if we did this all the time and been doing it for years, matter of fact, they came back immediately and said, now you want us to go all the way back to 1970? I said, I'd be satisfied you find one in the last 10 years. They're not going to find one. It's never happened before. It's either we've been doing it for years, 3 years, this case. This is when it started. You know, there's areas where multifamily is appropriate. This is not an appropriate area for multifamily. And the multifamily that we have there that they're talking about on Martinsville Street, it's a single duplex on a large lot, not 3 duplexes and a house crammed onto a 0.8 acre lot. The density of that is like 10 times. You know, there's areas in town where multifamily is appropriate. This area is not. And for the one that said that there's, oh, everybody that's been approving all this stuff, they're all still here. Oh, where's Mario? I haven't seen Mario around lately. You know, you go back to the beginning of this. This is what the whole thing started with this. And after the illegal rezoning, everybody on the Planning and Zoning Commission got canned. All of them, all 5 of them, including RJ. They all got canned. The Planning and Zoning Commission today is all new people. So what happened to them? I guess, you know, some of these guys that came in there, I think they came in the wrong meeting or something. This is not a Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. This is a Zoning Board of Adjustments. And to say that no one is, you know, everybody's still here. After that, Garth Hens lost his seat on the city council over this. He ran for re-election claiming that Kathleen Bellinger was a one-issue candidate. Well, she stomped him pretty bad, so I guess the people in this community are concerned about this one issue. After that, Jay Anderson lost his position on the city council and took the worst beating of any sitting city council member in the history of Nacogdoches. He came in 3rd place, got fewer votes than he did
Mr.
when he got
Blackburn,
elected.
can we stick to the
Yes.
topic, please? Thank
This
you.
is a topic.
Thank you
They're
very
saying
much.
nothing's ever
I
happened.
understand.
I mean, plenty of things have happened as a result of Logansport Street, including Mario leaving and Jimmy and Amelia not running for re-election. So to say that nothing has been happening is just laughable. And you talk to any realtor in town, and they'll tell you that the biggest need is single-family housing. We have plenty of apartments all over. All these apartments in town, they have signs out all the time, you know, free microwave, especially during the summer when they're trying to get those things rented. The biggest need in this community is single-family housing. Now, ZBA is like one of the last lines of defense to protect the community from situations like this when the city is not following their own ordinances. And again, we're not asking for anything big or special. All we're asking to do is for the city to follow their own ordinances. And I think we've demonstrated that this is a non-conforming lot. If you're going to expand it, you're going to need a variance. And that's not a big deal. All you got to do is pay the fee and apply for a variance. Same thing with the parking situation. If he were to get a variance to build, well, then he's going to need another variance to build it like that, where he's only going to have 12 parking places instead of 22, or 14 instead of 22. So these are easy solutions. We're not anti-development. You know, that like what Mr. Meyer was talking about when they built those 3 houses in the neighborhood, no one complained about that. You know, those are single-family houses. It's when you come in and want to do a drastic change. This is a drastic expansion and extension of that land use. That's what the Zoning Board of Adjustments is here for. So, you know, I would ask y'all to, I don't know how to phrase it, I'll let y'all worry about that, but to grant our appeals about the non-conforming use and the parking situation.
Thank you, Mr. Blackburn. Ms. Costello? Yes.
I would like to address the constant use of the word taxation. When we are given this reason, the tax base, it is never taken into consideration all of the things that will occur. The tax base, yes, but there will be more police patrol, there will be more fire patrol, there will be more EMT patrol. These erode the tax base. So that should be part of the argument when the tax base argument is given, because it really isn't that simple. The tax base, the appraisal districts, everything will go down. The arguments are superfluous. Anything I said here is a fact. And as I showed you, I have it in my book. I have letters from city. I have letters saying, maybe we didn't do this right. I have letters where the developer did not give the true information to the city council. I have these letters. I can show them to you. Anything I have said is a fact. And I do not understand and will not understand why this particular development was given preferential treatment and the citizens were totally ignored and ordinance were not put as they should have been, as I said earlier. Comprehensive plan, variance, all of it. This is absurd. Zoning is not about developers coming in making money. Zoning started back in the 19th century to protect integrity of neighborhoods, to protect things. I'm not talking about the bias I'll be accused of, which I have been accused of, not in my neighborhood, things like that. I have 2 HUD houses across the street from me. We are not an elitist neighborhood. We are just a neighborhood. We are also part of the history of this city. I have no more to say because I'm frankly worn out with all of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Costello. Okay.
Chairwoman, may I address the board and just provide some clarification on some of the comments that were made?
Our agenda does not allow for that. However, it is now the board's opportunity to ask you and the applicants if they have any clarifying questions or questions about the comments that were made. So this is our opportunity as a board to ask any questions, anything you've written down, anything that may have seemed a little blurry. But what I want to remind the board before we start our questioning is that we are here to talk about only what is being appealed and only the 2 items that are on the appeal application. So, of course, you can ask for any clarification that helps you arrive to that conclusion, but that is what we are here to do today. And that is what our committee is charged with doing. So, does anyone on the board have any questions for Mr. Blackburn, Ms. Costello, city staff of any kind? I'm sure you'll have written stuff down, and feel free to start in whatever order works best for you.
Can we ask the question why a variance wasn't applied for to begin with, or is that not germane to this? Of why a variance was not?
That is a question you can ask to clarify for,
Yes.
because this is a procedural issue, so yes. And that would be a question for city staff. So you want to make sure that we identify who we are asking the question of.
Right. Thank you, Ms. Ward. So again, just to clarify, when we're talking about expanding nonconforming uses or expanding nonconforming buildings, this is actually, the lot configuration is not being modified. The applicant is proposing to develop the lot, but they're not proposing to modify or enlarge or change in any way the physical configuration of the lot. Now, if the applicant were to subdivide the property, then they would have to come to this board for a variance because the lot depth is not the minimum 100 feet. But this clause that you're looking at now essentially says those lots created in that current configuration prior to 1970 are in conformance. If they were to modify the lot itself, expand it, subdivide it, change the boundaries of the lot, then that would come before this board for a variance. But because they're not, that's why a variance was not required.
But we hear variance issues, and that's exactly what I mean, I've been on the board where a lot was not the proper width, and it had to come before us before they could do anything.
For a subdivision. So you've
Now,
heard.
This was a lot over off of East Main that we heard about 3 months ago.
So that one, they were proposing to subdivide the property without any lot width at all. So they were basically proposing to provide a easement in lieu of the physical lot frontage, because it was, what they were doing was making, in a sense, a landlocked lot. And so that's the variance that you heard, was a reduction in lot width from 50 to 0, because they weren't providing any lot frontage at all.
Then my question also on your applicability on this 118-201. I guess what I'm asking is, if this is what you're gonna hang your hat on, saying this is why you granted it, then why do we even have a grandfathered clause then? That would mean that every lot that was formed before 1970 is automatically good to go.
You're correct. So when you have a lot that was created prior to our ordinance, it is grandfathered in. This section states that even if it is grandfathered in, you still have to have access to a public street. And so there's different sections of the ordinance that work together in conjunction. So Article 2 says that if you have a lot that existed in its prior configuration before we adopted our ordinance, it's in compliance with our development standards. But in order to issue a building permit, you still have to have frontage to a dedicated street. So that's where this section comes into play.
Well, does this mean then that there's going to be a dedicated street through Pecan Park?
So Logansport Street is a public street, and the city recognizes that that is a narrow street. Our police department has actually already drafted an ordinance to present to council to remove on-street parking from that section of Logansport if this permit is approved, because we realize that on-street parking could provide an impediment to emergency services. So if the permit is approved, staff is actually anticipating bringing forward an ordinance to city council to not allow on-street parking on that section of Logansport Street altogether. But it is a public street.
And for clarification for her, my question would be, so the city does maintain the road, even that gravel section of the road all the way into Pecan Park, and they maintain it at the same level and rate that they do a regular city street?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I guess, for me, my question is,
Please allow the board to ask their questions.
Okay,
But thank you.
when we're talking about non-conforming use, usually there's, and this property already does have a structure on it. And from my understanding, you cannot expand on the non-conformity, meaning if something is destroyed, or, act of God, if it's an 1,800 square foot house, it has to be built back as an 1,800 square feet structure or less. Wouldn't this be expanding on the nonconformity by adding structures to this?
So single-family residence is a permitted land use under the R4 zoning district, so it's not non-conforming. It's allowed by right.
Okay, I thought you said it was a non-conforming.
The lot itself, so there's the lot, and then there's the land use, which is the activity that's taking place on the property, right? And so the lot is the actual physical shape and boundaries of the property. The land use is the actual activity that's taking place on the property, and then you have structures. And so the zoning ordinance actually talks about non-conforming land use, non-conforming buildings, non-conforming structures. It identifies them each separately, but this section right here applies to the applicability. So it says, this is how it applies, and then it breaks down the different requirements for structures versus land use versus the different types of elements. And those sections are provided in your ordinance as well.
Right, I've got that. Did you have some,
I do have some questions. Are there any questions from this side of the board? For the applicant or city staff?
There has been some discussion that these are duplexes, and so you have a family unit per duplex. Is there a mechanism within the city to enforce that? If the parking regulations are for duplex use or two-family use? Is there some type of regulation that enforces that these will be used for two-family and not multiple, because it's R4?
Yeah, so again, the definition of family is a housekeeping unit with no more than two people that are unrelated. That applies to single family, two-family, and multifamily, regardless of the zoning district. So we've had people build single-family homes in multifamily zoning districts and try to rent them out to a bunch of students, and we've shut them down because it violates the code of ordinances. So it doesn't matter, the zoning district, it's the structure, you know? And so regardless if it's a one-unit building, a two-unit building, each unit is still limited to no more than two unrelated people.
So there's a mechanism already existing within the city that if the residents of Logansport determine that there are multiple people living in that house and not families, and they can complain to the city, and the city will enforce that,
Correct.
even though it's R4 zoning.
Okay. Any questions from the board on this side? Mr. Jones?
When was the property actually rezoned R4? Do you recall?
2020.
2020.
So it was during COVID.
Yes, ma'am.
Was that a Zoom meeting?
Yes, ma'am.
I guess I'm still trying to wrap my head around the definition of the multifamily, single family, and you're saying a duplex is still a two-family, one in each. I mean, say there's two sides of it. There's one family unit in each side of that. So two families per building.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So I have a question. It was rezoned R4 in 2020. And when did the applicant apply for the construction and development?
January of this year.
Okay. January 2023, and there was this 214 duplex project was submitted in January 2023.
Yes, actually, the specific date,
Okay.
let me see, I have it here. January 25th, 2023 is when we received the building permit.
Okay.
So what are we charged with, or what question are we? Yeah, what, I'd like to know.
Okay. Are there any other questions at this time? I don't mind repeating our charges, but just asking. Okay. Let me pull it up so I can read you our exact charges here. Flipped my pages over. Okay. So our charges as a board is to consider a request, and this is different because, as Philip and City has mentioned, typically we're hearing someone asking for a variance. This is an appeal to the city's already made decision. So even our motion is going to sound different than normal. So this is for us to consider a request for an appeal of the decision of the city planner and interpreting the zoning ordinance, section 118-202, continuing nonconforming use, and section 118-466, off-street parking requirements, as it applies to a building permit submitted for the construction of duplexes at 1102 Logansport Street. And this same appeal has been filed twice. So for this discussion, again, we're going to have this discussion as one, and then we will have two separate votes. So what we're talking about here is we're considering both Mr. Blackburn and Ms. Costella's appeal to the decision of the city planner for the zoning ordinance continuing nonconforming use. So they've come to us considering the nonconforming use conversation. And then they've also come to us to consider the off-street parking requirements.
So.
And the other issues are moot for us, for our committee.
So the motion would be to either approve or deny the appeal of Mr. Blackburn and Mrs. Costello.
That's correct.
Okay.
And Another reminder is that you can make, your motion can be in whole or in part, because the appeal is for 2 items. So you'd want to be specific in your motion. If you feel that you are in favor of or against the appeal for either 118-202 or 118-466. It may be that you are in favor or against 118-202, and you are the opposite for 118-466. But before we make a motion, I want to make sure there are no more questions from this board for either the applicants or any city staff.
I guess my question is, for the city's stance on this, that lot is conforming at this point. Is that what
Correct, correct, yes.
The lot is well, now I have a question.
well,
The lot is conforming,
the-
or the lot is non-conforming and they're allowed to continue with non-conforming use?
The lot is conforming with Article 6 of our development codes.
Understood. Okay. Okay. So it's conforming with the development code that speaks to non-conforming use.
Because 201 uses the language of deeming conformance.
Please allow the board to hear the explanation from the city attorney.
201 speaks to conformance, deeming conformance of the development standards for pre-existing lots.
But it also states that it says if the city or other governmental agency takes an act or action which transforms a previously conforming structure. And to me, an act or an action is in the future. That'd be like if the lot is 90 feet now and or 100 feet, and the city widened that street and it took 10 feet, then that is that was not the burden of the owner.
That is certainly correct, but the act that made this lot non-conforming was the adoption of the zoning ordinance, which prescribed a larger size.
Okay.
And I would like to remind the board that these need to be in question form, not discussion form, because we do not have a motion to discuss as a board yet. So we need to propose
So we're in discussion.
no, we are in questions.
Questions,
This is a board to city or applicant questioning right now only, and not discussion. We will have discussion after our motions are made.
Okay.
Thank you, though, Ms. Ward.
Okay.
Did I answer the question that was in that statement?
I don't agree with you, but you answered it.
Okay.
We'll keep those comments until our discussion. Okay. Are there any other questions from the board? Okay. I will entertain a motion from the board. A motion and a second before we can begin our discussion. And I'd like to remind everyone in the audience that this section, this part of our hearing, is for the board only, and I would like for y'all to please allow us to have this discussion openly with you. And thank you for being here.
I guess I'll make a motion that we grant the appeal of the Mr. Blackburn and Mrs. Costello in the interpreting of the zoning ordinance, section 118-202.
Okay. So this is a motion in favor of Mr. Blackburn's appeal. Mr. Blackburn and Ms., we're going to combine these for your motion, or you are combining this, okay? A motion in favor of Mr. Blackburn and Mrs. Costello's appeal concerning
Zoning ordinance, section 118-202.
Madam
And-
Chair, they need to be separate motions.
Okay.
You can do the same one twice, but they
Sure.
do need to
Okay.
be separate motions
Okay.
and separate votes.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Can we?
Will you
make a
please
motion?
amend that motion?
I
Yes.
need to amend the motion then that I make a motion that we grant the appeal of Mr. Blackburn regarding the interpretation of zoning ordinance section 118-202. And then I make a motion that we grant the appeal of Mrs. Pat Costello in the interpretation of the zoning ordinance section 118-202.
Okay.
We need 2 seconds, aren't we?
I have a motion in favor of Mr. Blackburn's appeal concerning their interpretation of zoning ordinance section 118-202, and I will begin with that motion. Do I have a second for that motion?
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second, and it is now open for discussion.
My question of this is we are only voting on lot depth right now. Is that correct?
Okay, I'm sorry, can you put this closer, Ed? Thank you so much, Mr.
My
Poole.
question is, on
Yeah.
this particular motion, we're only voting on lot depth. Is that correct?
We are only voting on
The building permit.
the continuing non-conforming use, which includes the lot depth.
The appeal for lot, the lot depth. I'm just saying that
Yes.
we're not voting on the parking part of it right now.
No.
Okay. Only-
That's correct.
Only lot depth.
The
But we-
motion would need to be restated then.
Oh,
It's
okay,
confusing, that's why I
Okay.
asked that question.
okay.
The motion was to, in favor of his appeal, which included 2 points. If you intended for both points to be included, your motion is fine. If you did not intend for both points to be included, then you need to
I
restate
thought
your
by saying
motion.
section 118-202, I
Okay.
was talking about the zoning ordinance, because the other is section 118-466, the off-street parking.
But they are included in item 4B together.
Okay. I didn't know if we were doing them
it's-
separate for the sake of discussion.
So it would be, if you wanted to approve one but not the other, it would be affirm in favor of the appeal for lot depth and not.
I thought we
for-
weren't discussing lot depth, we were discussing a building permit. That
You
was-
are. You're-
Okay,
The building permit has 2 pieces to it, though.
Okay.
And those are the 2 decisions that are appealed. So you need
Okay.
to specify which decision you are agreeing with Mr. Blackburn on
okay.
for essentially overturning the city's decision.
Okay.
So feel free to correct me. Whenever you're making a motion on item 4B as a whole, but you can vote in favor of, you can make a motion in favor of one section and against another section. Is that correct or incorrect?
Now, the motion should be affirming in part for 202. Unless you want to affirm both of them, then it's just affirming the appeal. So did you have an intent, or did you just wanted to vote on one,
I
each
thought
one
we
of?
were, I thought we were taking it as 2 parts.
You're taking Ms. Costello's as one part and
Oh,
Mr.
okay.
Blackburn's as one part.
Okay, I misunderstood. I thought we were
Yeah.
taking it as
Yeah.
the,
So now we're going to divide it another 2 ways.
Okay, I
You
tell you,
can. You
so
can.
we can though.
Yeah, you
Correct.
can.
So we're going to kill this motion.
okay.
Start over.
I can withdraw that
So-
motion.
Okay, or we can have a motion to kill it, which however we choose to do that.
She's withdrawn,
just
so it's
withdrew.
done.
You withdrawn your motion. Okay, fantastic. So I'll entertain a motion on item 4B, which is Mr. Blackburn's appeal of the decision of the city planner in interpreting the zoning ordinance, section 118-202, continuing non-conforming use, and section 118-466, off-street parking requirements as it applies to building permits submitted for the construction of duplexes at 1102 Logansport Street.
Okay,
How does that sound?
so I need to do them both, obviously.
I'm asking only for item 4B, a motion only on item 4B right now.
Okay. Well, I make a motion that we grant the appeal of the decision, we grant the appeal of Mr. Blackburn regarding the interpretation of zoning ordinance section 118-202, continuing nonconforming use, and section 118-466, off-street parking requirements as it applies to a building permit submitted for the construction of duplexes at 1102 Logansport Street.
Okay. I'm going to repeat your motion. I have a motion to grant the appeal of Mr. Blackburn, interpreting the zoning ordinance, Section 118-202, continuing nonconforming use, and Section 118-466, off-street parking requirements, as it applies to a building permit submitted for the construction of duplexes at 1102 Logansport Street. That is a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
I have a motion and second, and now we are open for discussion.
Do we need another one for Mrs. Costello?
We will discuss this motion,
Okay.
and then we will have one separate of this. So we are going to enter discussion now as a board. Would you like to say anything about your motion? Feel free.
That's not the way I don't interpret it the way the city interpreted it, I guess I should say. I
Okay.
look at the applicability as future use because it says if the city or other government agency takes an act or action, which is in the future, that's how I interpret it. Because if this was the case, then we would never have a need for a ZBA because nothing then would ever be non-conforming. Everything that was done before 1970 would be automatically granted. So that's how I interpret it. We just need to probably clean some things up with that part, because if you're going to use that as your argument, then why do you even have Section 118-202 for non-conforming use?
Right. I think the point of the city, though, in my opinion or my understanding, is that there is a difference between a legally conforming lot, past, present, future, and the use of that land, past, present, or future. And I think that kind of what we're getting to here is the nitty-gritty parts of that, which does cause a lot of gray areas and confusion. And that would be my comment on that.
But that's making an assumption, that we're gonna go past, present, and future. It's difficult to make an assumption that you're gonna go past, present, and future. We know what the past is, and we kind of know what the present is, but we don't know what the future is going to hold. And I think that's what bothers me.
Okay. Ed, did you have any discussion points or comments?
We live in an old city, and ordinances were changed years and years and years after subdivisions were created. I see this as a grandfathering issue, whole and simple.
I think it should have been applied for a variance, but now that's.
I just see that the lot depth was created way before zoning ordinances, therefore it's grandfathered.
So it's a grandfather non-conforming use.
Correct.
That should be have a variance applied for.
I don't agree with that.
Pardon me?
Don't agree with that.
Okay.
Okay. And prior to, I think it's a compounded, complicated issue that it was zoned R2, switched to a R4 zoning whenever concerned local, throughout the community, as well as immediately affected neighbors feel that they didn't have the opportunity to have a discussion, and definitely that's the charge and call for, a variance, and I definitely understand that concern and that side of things. Certainly, I think there's some confusion, or not confusion, but it is a bit difficult to interpret when does that change happen? When does the lot use change actually happen? Is kind of what I'm struggling with on particularly Section 118-202.
Right. I think this has to do with future. That's the applicability. I think 118-201 is future because it's saying the act or actions, and then also it also says no lot or structure existing on the effective date of the ordinance from what this derives of creating it as a nonconformity. This lot's always been the 90 feet in depth. But I still think this applicability, this whole section has to do with future. And if TxDOT came in and changed something, or if someone put a water line in and now you can't build on that, meaning an other governmental agency, That's how I'm interpreting it, that this is for the future, and this is where we are right now. And it is a grandfathered, non-conforming use lot that needs a variance.
Gotcha.
That's, or a variance applied for.
Sure.
That's how I'm interpreting this.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you know, you get into, if you're discussing the nonconformity use of lands, and this has a structure on it. I know if it has a structure, it automatically it goes under the grandfathered use of, if it's destroyed, you have 180 days, I think it is, to apply for a building permit. Is that correct? To build back?
For non-conforming buildings, yes.
Right. Non-conforming grandfathered, if that's what you want to call it. Okay. And I guess that's what I look at with this. This is not a vacant lot. It has a house on it.
Yeah, it has a legally permitted home,
Right,
yes.
Right. But with the lot only being 90 feet in depth, it's still a non-conforming grandfathered use, correct?
No, the use is conforming, the lot is non-conforming.
Okay.
The use of the property as a single-family residence is a legally permitted
Right.
conforming use. The lot configuration itself is
But the
non-conforming.
structure goes with the land.
The
The structure goes with the
The
land.
structure is on the land, but they're
Correct.
different.
So, but when you have in here that if anything, on a single-family residence, it says on here, a building permit is issued for the reconstruction or repair within 180 days of the occurrence of the damage or destruction.
That's a different section of the ordinance.
It says single-family residential, and you're saying that that is a single-family residential on there.
Yes.
It's a home.
I thought the discussion was only amongst the board.
Oh,
Yes,
well,
we do need-
okay. I didn't know if I could ask her that question. Okay,
Yeah.
Okay.
The discussion
Yes.
needs to come
Okay.
back in. Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you, Ms. Costello.
okay. Yeah, that's what is my deal, there's a
So-
house on it.
Right, so your conversation, it sounds like, and what I'm hearing is, there's a single-family home on
There's a
there,
house on
and
that
that
lot.
single-family home is grandfathered with the
Yes.
zoning of the land. But
Yes.
adding
Yes.
to is changing the
Yes,
use
yes,
of
it's
the
expanding
property.
the non-conforming use, because it is still only 90 feet. And you're expanding, you're exacerbating that
Whenever they're
non-conformity.
changing the
Yes,
use
by adding,
by adding to it, they're
structures to it.
pulling it out of its
yes,
grandfathered position, so to speak,
speak,
because
yes.
they're calling it grandfathered. Is that what I'm
That's-
hearing you
that's-
say?
Yes, that's what I'm.
Okay. Do any of you have any discussion to add to that? No, I'm listening. Okay. I'm in agreement with you. I also think that it appears that the home being on this lot, and this lot is grandfathered, and the zoning has changed to R4, so if these structures were in existence, they'd be grandfathered together, but to build on them does change the use of the land, which is
Yes.
allowable, but
I think it needs a
it's not
variance.
90, it's only 90
90
feet, so
right.
if that's, if you want to improve to change, then it would need to conform, or there would need to be an application for a variance. It would just need to follow a proper process that would allow the community to participate in that decision-making.
Right.
However, I do not agree at all with the way that the applicant has appealed the parking standards. I do not think that it is the applicant's position or right to make a decision on how this property will be used. I fully believe that if I were to, if I followed the process of what I think should have been a variance as well, and I was allowed to build two-family, the way two-family is defined, and I think there was some confusion about what a building is and how to define an apartment complex. But if I were a developer, it is my decision to vet my tenants and to do what I am supposed to do in accordance with the city's rules. And it's unfortunate that not everyone behaves that way, but there is a method, as Ed mentioned, for the city to enforce that and people to complain. But if it's a duplex and it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath duplex, there is no, someone can make an assumption that it's gonna be full of college kids, but that is not the way that it was presented. It is a home, it is a 2-family home, and it conforms with what the definition of a 2-family home is. And that is not something that a simple application should be able to determine.
Right, I guess I was looking at.
That's my
Right,
feelings about
yeah.
that item, and I don't
Right.
feel comfortable voting in favor of the off-street parking requirements because of the way a 2-family,
Are we discussing
structures.
another motion now?
No, this
No,
is
it's
one motion
Yeah. We
for
can-
item 4B. We can talk about
We
parking
can talk about
and,
parking now?
yes,
Okay.
we can talk about parking and non-conforming use.
Okay, what my position on this is that, yes, I saw the plans, but it's zoned R4. And we only have Mr. Bohack's word that it's gonna be a duplex. Could be whatever it wants to be in R4 zoning. And if that's the case, if he chooses to put multiple students in that setting, then we're woefully short on parking. So, in my opinion, when you look at the parking regulations, you have to look at the worst-case scenario.
Right.
And in this situation, the best-case scenario is duplex. Worst-case scenario is multiple tenants, and it's allowed in R4. So I have a concern that, and then on top of that, there's gonna be an ordinance, which I agree with completely, that there'll be no on-street parking. Well, that's just gonna exacerbate the problem.
Sure.
So where do these tenants park? And so anyway, how do you hope for the best and plan for the worst?
Right, agreed. And I agree. But his plans for 2-family unit, even though it is multifamily and it's allowable, if a 2-family, I don't even want to call it a duplex, a building with 2 separate habitable structures, if our city rules here say that one building that has 2 separate units can have 2 parking spots each, we could assume that they would put a student in each bedroom, right? But that doesn't mean that that's what that is, and that's not how it reads.
Well, the reason I asked that question.
It's
is-
allowable,
is
but it's not how it
in
reads. The
R4's
zoning allows
yeah.
for it, but it's not how it reads. If you build a duplex, you only
But I
have to
think that-
have,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
if you build one building that has 2 separate habitations or living units, then what our rules here say is that you only have to have 2 parking spaces per side.
But if my understanding of the R4 zoning, those students could be in there, or non-student, it didn't matter. Multiple people were in there. That if it's R4 zoning, the city has no enforcement ability because they're not breaking any rules.
Correct.
And that's correct.
Am I
Yeah.
correct?
And that's my interpretation of 2-family, or the spirit, I think it was you have a 2-family, and I'm gonna use the word duplex, on a lot in town, on one lot, and so you need 4 parking spaces. That's how I interpret it. It was gonna be on one lot, not 3 duplexes on one lot.
Right.
And so I agree with Ed on the multifamily. It's zoned R4. It doesn't matter if they're not related.
Yeah, there's no
The
restriction.
city doesn't, the city's not gonna enforce anything because they cannot be related. They don't have to be related to be there.
So for me, that argument falls under the non-conforming use argument and not the parking requirements. That's simply for me. That argument falls under non-conforming use and how you arrive at having so many in one place, and then
Right.
where is the potential in R4? But the off-street parking requirements for a 2-family or 2-family unit, I don't think that argument's there, me personally.
I've got a problem with the parking availability, and I'm kind of like Ed, I think it is R4. That potential is there, and I think you've got to figure out how to allow for that, especially if they do the ordinance and take it off city parking.
I think all you have to do is look at Appleby Sand Road and it's a mess.
Okay.
So in this motion, I mean, when we vote, can you vote on two parts of it? That's what I'm still trying to.
That's what I was doing, it is two separate.
We understand.
Right.
Didn't you state it as one?
Yeah, that's what,
One motion.
The motion is for public hearing item 4B. And item 4B includes both of these sections.
Okay, that's what that was my interpretation.
So if you want to approve one but not the other, then you would need to vote down the current motion, propose the motion that contains the pieces you approve and don't approve, and see if you get see if four of you agree on that one.
Okay?
It is admittedly laborious, but it's the process.
Okay. So what he's getting at here is we have a motion, and we have a motion in favor of the applicant's appeal. We have a second. And so if we would like to separate these two, then we have to vote this motion down, and then we have to start a new motion that's in favor of one item and not the other.
Okay.
that's what I started with.
Exactly.
That's what I
Yeah, I
started
think it
with.
just left out the second part, so we'd have to include both in the motion. So I'll call a vote on Rhonda's motion to grant the appeal of Mr. Blackburn, interpreting the zoning ordinance, section 118-202, continuing nonconforming use, and section 118-466, off-street parking requirements as it applies to a building permit submitted for the construction of duplexes at 1102 Logansport Street. All those in favor, aye.
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 All those opposed, nay.
Aye.
Aye, yeah, sorry.
opposed, aye.
All those opposed, aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry.
Aye.
All those opposed, aye. Aye. So that's 3, 2, and,
2, 4, and 3 against, so the motion fails.
right, the motion fails. So I will entertain another motion.
And now you want them separated?
We're still voting on item 4B.
You need to specify, you made a motion in favor of both. If you wish to make a motion now in favor of only one of them and not in favor of the other one, you can do so. I didn't hear you change your position on
No.
parking, yeah, so you're still in favor of both of them. So somebody else should probably make a different motion. But you can make a different motion if you want.
Okay, I will make a motion on the parking.
Okay.
How is that, how are we gonna read that? We will grant the appeal at 1102 Logansport Street to Mr. Blackburn regarding the parking situation. Is that enough of a motion?
To also state where you are on the,
The
So you're
sec-
for, so you're
The
Yeah,
section
you gotta have
number.
both of them.
4B, and it's 118-466.
You also have to give a position for 118-202.
Correct.
so you'd have to say that, so you're,
Well, I'm separating them.
he doesn't want them separated. He wants you to either be yes, no, no, yes, yes, no, or no, no.
So right now, you have a motion to grant the appeal at 1102 for Mr. Blackburn in favor of 118-466 off-street parking.
And then 118-202, if we have to keep them together.
I need to know if you're for or against 118-202 in your
The
motion.
non-conforming use.
Four. I mean, I am supporting his appeal.
On both items?
Yes.
That's what we just voted down.
Well, that's what I thought we did. That's what I'm not understanding.
You
So
have, you
he's
have
saying
four
if you want to
possible.
separate the two.
Commissioner Ward did give you the right formula there.
Misunderstanding something?
No, you just have to state your position on both of them, and then we have double votes. Once we do that, we can vote yes, no, no, and all the
Okay.
different options.
No, no, Ed, that's
Am I
not correct.
right?
No.
Okay.
No.
The motion has to be yes, 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 no, no, yes, or no, no.
Okay.
So the motion's got to contain one of those four options.
And we can go back and redo that if, what, I mean, I guess we're trying to ask, what, I guess we do need to know, what is the position then on?
In a motion. So your motion was in favor of Mr. Blackburn's appeal.
So that was-
Yes, 118-202, yes, 118-466.
Correct.
So you've already voted down yes, yes.
And as a board, we voted no, we voted that down.
All right.
Okay.
So then we're gonna, now what are we gonna do next?
So-
That's what I'm not
That's-
understanding.
We
That's up to you.
So, yeah, that's up to our board. So as a board, I need a motion that's similar to
Mr. Blackburn for Ms. Costello.
voting in favor for or against the appeal and for, which would be for section 118-202, against 118-466, or against 118-202 and for 118-466, or
Okay.
not in his favor at all.
Are you for both?
All right.
Maybe Ed, I think he's understanding what he's, or,
Okay, so we're gonna, the motion will be for 118-202 for Mr. Blackburn. And
You're fixing to-
118-466 against Mr. Blackburn. Am I correct?
That is a good
yes,
motion.
that's a
Yes.
motion.
Okay.
If that's the one you intend, that is a good motion. If that's not what you intend, then you probably shouldn't make that motion and let
Yeah.
somebody else make one.
Then I'm
That
not
means that,
understanding.
that means that you're okay with the parking deal. You just said that you're okay with, because you're saying you're okay with the city.
Okay. Then I'm just gonna go straight for the parking deal. Oh. I'm gonna go for the 118, that's the 466 then. I'm gonna make that motion, that I'm for that, off-street, for the parking, not to be on the street.
I think she's still making the same motion.
Okay. And then, will you please complete your motion to include 118-202?
So I would be against that.
Okay. So the motion is to, in favor of Mr. Blackburn's appeal concerning section 118-466 and not in favor of section 118-202. Correct?
Actually, no. Well, I'm sorry, I'm just.
That's okay.
I just
That's
have to-
okay. This is,
I'm gonna reverse it.
this is very difficult because
Yes.
this, the motion
we're having
itself
this-
is the opposite of what we traditionally make a
Exactly,
motion for.
exactly. So-
And there are two items in this motion, so it
Exactly.
does
So
make
I'm
it
gonna-
a little
I'm gonna
difficult.
support Mr. Blackburn on the 118-202 and then negate him on the 118-466.
She's-
So I have a motion from you in favor for the appeal concerning section 118-202 and not in favor of section 118-466.
Correct.
Okay. That is a motion. Do I have a second? I will second that motion. And I am allowed to do that as the chair in this board. So I have a motion and a second. And we are now open for discussion.
Just as a point of clarification.
Yes,
Okay.
of course.
The vote is in favor of granting the appeal for 118-202, non-conforming.
Correct.
And the vote is also to deny the appeal in section 118-466, off-street parking.
Correct. It's not to deny the appeal, it's to not vote in favor of section 118-466 concerning the appeal.
Well, but you either grant or deny the appeal. Right?
Yes, so she's voting to grant, she's voting, the motion is for the appeal, but only because, in favor of 118-202, not in favor of 118-466. So the motion is to grant the appeal, but for the favor of 118-222 and not 118-466.
Okay, so again, point of clarification.
Sure.
If this, now this, in this vote, it's a non-conforming lot, therefore it's not applicable. It can't proceed. It has to go to ZBA if it's gonna do that again. But with the off-street parking, then the current plan for off-street parking would be okay, and there would be no further requirement.
This current plan for off-street parking, or for parking, is not, it's not whether or not it would be okay, it's whether or not it's applicable to this procedural question
Right, but
that's being brought before us.
The city has,
The effect that Mr. Poole is describing is correct.
Okay, yeah,
If you support the appeal on 201 or 202, he has to get a variance regardless.
correct.
So he won't get his building permit, so you will stop the building permit, and he'll have to come back to the drawing board.
Right.
Okay.
okay. So my point of question on this is that, I mean, if I'm not agreeing with the current vote, I vote no, I get that. But there's no mechanism to change that once it's, or do we just keep doing this till we get to some type of an agreement?
You keep
4 out
doing
of
this
5,
until
we
you
do it
voted.
until we come to an agreement.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And that's part of it, and that's why we're here.
So if we vote yes on Mary Ann's motion, does that pretty well make the section 118-466 moot then?
For, not as a application in city processes, but for this specific cause.
He would have to apply for a variance on lot depth but not parking.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And when he applies for his variance, then the notices will go out and his process will start all over, and then anyone who's concerned will receive notice and come here and have the right to bring any of these arguments forward.
Okay.
Got it? Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay. I will call a vote concerning the motion to approve Mr. Blackburn's appeal in favor of, in the interpretation of zoning ordinance section 118-202, continuing nonconforming use, not in favor of section 118-466, off-street parking requirements. All those in favor, aye. Aye. Those not in favor, aye.
Aye.
Okay. Okay. Your motion is denied.
So is it proper to make another motion?
Yes, now is the time to have another motion.
Okay, I make a motion that we deny the appeal of Mr. Blackburn for section 118-202, and that we grant the appeal for Mrs. Costella's motion, appeal in section 118-466.
Okay, we're only doing it for Mr. Blackburn. Ms. Costella's is item 4C, and we
Okay,
will do
okay.
hers next. So we are doing Mr. Blackburn's right now.
I make a motion that we deny the appeal of Mr. Blackburn,
Okay,
Of 118-202,
118-202.
okay.
but you grant 118.
Yes, 466, but I can't do that, right?
Yes, you
So that's-
Yes,
I
you
can't?
can. That's
Okay.
what we're doing.
Then that's
Yep.
my motion.
Okay. So will you repeat your motion, please, Mr. Paul?
I'll make a motion that we deny the request for appeal of Mr. Blackburn in zoning ordinance section 118-202, and we grant the motion for the appeal from Mrs. Costello. in-
No, Mr. Blackburn.
Mr. Blackburn.
Mr. Blackburn. In section 118-466, excuse me.
Okay. Okay, so I have a motion to deny Mr. Blackburn's appeal regarding section 118-202 and in favor of Mr. Blackburn's appeal, grant Mr. Blackburn's appeal for section 118-466.
Correct.
Sorry, I'm trying to read this in verbatim. So I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion or clarification? So Mr. Blackburn is appealing the decision of the city planner, and Ed is saying that he is in agreement with this appeal under section 118-466, but not under section 118-202.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. Any discussion here? Okay, I'll call a vote. All of those in favor, aye.
Aye.
All of those opposed, aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right.
So the only option you haven't done yet is no.
Is to, not vote for it, or to not
So-
grant Mr. Blackburn the appeal at all.
Madam Chair, may I remind the,
Confusion.
Yeah.
Still,
Yeah,
I still think that there's confusion.
yeah,
We can't
Yes.
separate it out.
the appeals were not brought to you that way.
Right, so we have to vote for them how they're brought to us. So, the only other motion we have for Mr. Blackburn's is to not approve Mr. Blackburn's appeal. Ms. Costella's is identically written, and we can vote, we will be voting on hers next. So,
Madam Chair,
yes,
may I suggest a bio break?
yes.
And while you're on bio break, may I remind you all that it takes 4 votes to do
Yes.
anything. If you don't get 4 votes on any of the motions, the decision of the city stands as is.
Understood. Okay. We will break.
Thank you.
Thank you. Going to reconvene. Yes, Ms. Costello?
I want to point something out. My daughter is a city attorney, and I know that the city attorney's job is to defend his city. In the middle of all of this, we asked, under the law, we could have had a different attorney that wasn't involved. And I am concerned about that because, of course, this isn't going to end here, as we know. So I am concerned about a lot of things that are going on right now. I don't know why we weren't granted an independent attorney, which the city had the right to approve.
Thank you. So the board has brought 3 motions and voted on those 3 motions.
Can we resurrect the motion? I could try again.
You can try again.
Okay. I think we're all now figuring out what is going on here. I mean, as far as we're all kind of getting the lay of the land of how this is, so,
So I need to hear, the motion that I need to have from someone on the board is a motion concerning item 4B.
okay.
And item 4B is considering a request for appeal of the decision of the city planner. This is Mr. Blackburn. In interpreting the zoning ordinance, section 118-202 and section 118-466. And what I'm understanding from our board is that there's some confusion on whether your motion is for or against. The appeal is not the same as whether or not your intention is in favor of one section or the other. So your motion can be for or against the appeal and in favor of one interpretation ordinance or the next.
Okay. I would
So it can
restate-
be a yes, yes,
Right,
yes, no, no, yes, no, no.
yes. Correct, I have that, yes.
Okay.
I guess I would just restate my motion, that we grant the appeal of, grant the appeal of Mr. Blackburn in interpreting the zoning ordinance, section 118-202, continuing nonconforming use, and granting section 118-466 off-street parking requirements, as it applies to a building permit submitted for the construction of duplexes at 1102 Logansport Street.
Okay. So Ms. Ward is proposing revisiting her motion of in favor of Mr. Blackburn and his appeal in the decision of the city planner and interpreting the zoning ordinance, section 118-202, continuing nonconforming use, and section 118-466, off-street parking requirements, as it applies to a building permit submitted for the construction of duplexes at 1102 Logansport Street. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? My personal discussion for you is that I am more in favor of the application of section 118-202 and less in favor of the application of section 118-466. But I understand Mr. Poole's concern regarding off-street parking requirements and how the zoning plays into that.
Had it been the zoning before, we wouldn't be concerned with that, as concerned. But with
Right.
it being R4, it's considered apartments. It could be,
Right.
yeah. I
And
do agree with that on that.
I agree, and I understand that. I don't think that that's a procedural issue for me specific. I don't think there was anything procedurally wrong with that interpretation, is why I do not feel in favor of that. I don't have a problem with the procedural part, but I do with the interpretation of zoning ordinance section 118-202. So that is where my vote plays in, or my thought process plays in. Do you have any discussion for your motion?
No, pretty much what I said before. I just
Okay.
think, my interpretation of 118-202 is the nonconforming use, that it needs a variance. And then the same way with the off-street parking, it's R4. And you can put as many spaces as you want there in R4. But what Mr. Bohack had in here was just 2 per bedroom. And I guess what kind of got my interest is when we had looked at the deal from 215, and when they had at the top of their 12 bedrooms, when in essence it is 18 bedrooms. So that's still not even correct. Because they were showing the parking as 12 bedrooms, and it's really 18, not even counting the house that's another 3 bedrooms. So that's what was concerning me, is it,
Right.
the plans submitted at the top don't correctly reflect what is actually on the plot, on the plat.
Right, okay.
So that's why, that was my reasoning for.
That's how you're
granting.
arriving
Yes,
to that
yes.
argument, and just, okay. Okay. Any other discussion there? Okay. Well, I'm going to ask for a vote if there is no other discussion. So all of those in favor for granting Mr. Blackburn's appeal per this motion, say aye.
Aye.
Go aye.
Okay. Opposed? Aye. Motion carries. Now I need a motion for item 4C, public hearing. Consider, and this is for Ms. Costellas, consider a request for an appeal of the decision of the city planner and interpreting the zoning ordinance, section 118-202, continuing nonconforming use, and section 118-466, off-street parking requirements, as it applies to a building permit submitted for construction of duplexes at 1102 Logansport Street. This request has been submitted by Pat Costello, case file ZBA 2023-03. So I'm opening this up for a motion, please.
I can state the same motion.
Okay.
To grant the appeal of Mrs. Costello for the interpretation of the zoning ordinance, section 118-202, continuing nonconforming use, and section 118-466, off-street parking requirements, as it applies to a building permit submitted for the construction of duplexes at 1102 Logansport Street.
Very well. So I have a motion to approve the appeal for the decision of the city planner in interpreting the zoning ordinance, section 118-202, continuing nonconforming use, and section 118-466, off-street parking requirements as it applies to a building permit submitted for the construction of duplexes at 1102 Logansport Street. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
I understand that there are two different hearings taking place, two different appeals, but is there anything that's not being said that if we grant both, are we causing an issue? I don't understand why there's two. There are other things.
There's two because there's two applicants.
Right. But.
Right, so they're
is there
each granted
something here
their.
that I'm not seeing?
I don't think so.
No.
From what I read through them, it
No.
looked like the exact same petition, the exact same appeal.
It is the same.
Except for
The
that
same
one-
appeal and the same
Except for that one
wording.
page that they had marked in purple. That was the only thing that was not first submitted to us with email.
Just seems odd to me.
That it's the same petition?
It's just
It's
seems
because
odd
there's
to me.
two applicants
Yeah.
and they're,
Excuse me, we assumed it was one position with both of us, and we were both looking for the same thing. I didn't realize it would be broken down into two different agenda items.
so there are two, whenever you filed separate appeals,
Well, I know that now, but.
Right.
When I filed just to be supportive of the motion. That was the reason I filed the appeal. So my appeal was exactly the same.
Other people could have filed.
right,
We
right.
had 4 applicants.
But because there's two appeals, we're voting on both of your appeals and giving you the same attention that you deserve. Yes,
It just
yes,
seems that they could have been co-applicants.
correct,
Instead of the way they did it.
correct. One of them could have been an applicant and the other one could have spoken in favor of even at part of public hearing, but it's two, and so we're voting on two.
Right, I get that.
And so, yeah. Any discussion there? I think I really feel like I have to say that this is, you know, the appeal is to the decision of the city planner, not necessarily what exactly is the plans are and what's happening necessarily. That's part of it, but the decision is, the appeal is to the decision and interpretation of the zoning ordinances by the city planner. And I sincerely do not believe that the interpretation under section 118.466 off-street parking requirements for R2, I do not believe that that was interpreted incorrectly. I do believe that the zoning ordinance section 118.202 was interpreted incorrectly. And so I just want to state that on record, so.
I think we're still at this point because of some vague terminology in it from
Sure.
day one.
Sure.
I don't think it was, I shouldn't say wrongly interpreted. I think it was interpreted, but there were some loopholes or some gaps in it that allowed us to get to this point, so.
Sure, absolutely. And that's why we're here. And that's why we're doing this together as a
Yes.
community.
Yes.
So, is there any other discussion? No? Okay, then I'll call a vote. All those in favor for granting the appeal? Aye. All those opposed? Aye. Motion carries. Okay. So, sorry. Sorry, my pages are a little mixed up here. So the results of the vote of the record for item 4B, public hearing, consider a request for an appeal of the decision of the city planner in interpreting the zoning ordinance, section 118.202, continuing non-conforming use, and section 118.466, off-street parking requirements, as it applies to a building permit submitted by the construction of duplexes at 1102 Logansport Street. This request has been submitted by Philip Blackburn, case file ZBA 2023-02. The board has voted in favor for the appeal. For item 4C, public hearing, consider a request for an appeal of the decision of the city planner in interpreting the zoning ordinance, section 118.202, continuing nonconforming use, and section 118.466, off-street parking requirements as it applies to a building permit submitted for construction of duplexes at 1102 Logansport Street. This request has been submitted by Pat Costello, case file ZBA 2023-03. This board has voted in favor for the appeal. Today is April 20th, and it is 6:57 p.m., and I am adjourning this meeting.